Chapter 2809, The Darkstar Divine Hall, Greetings, Your Majesty. The various Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters there all bowed towards the Darkstar Emperor. In order to avoid standing out, all Jian-Shin could do was copy them and play along. The Darkstar Emperor said nothing. He maintained a neutral expression on his handsome face as he glanced past everyone with his cold eyes, locking onto Jian-Shin in the end. Right now, his presence was even more tremendous and dense than when Jian-Shin sensed it in the Two World Mountains. That was because the Darkstar Emperor's strength was suppressed in the Two World Mountains, preventing him from unleashing all of it. Now that he had left the Two World Mountains, he obviously displayed his full strength. To Jian-Shin, the presence he gave off right now was so powerful that it even surpassed some first heavenly layer chaotic primes who had just broken through in the Saints' world. He can achieve such terrifying strength as a 9th heavenly layer infinite prime. The Darkstar Emperor is also a rare genius, Jian-Shin thought. In the past, his understanding of the Darkstar Emperor had always been limited to rumors. Only now when he saw him in person did he discover that the Darkstar Emperor was actually even stronger than what he imagined him to be. He even began to suspect that the Darkstar Emperor already possessed the strength to take on 2nd heavenly layer chaotic primes. Against a powerful enemy like that, Jian-Shin definitely would not be his opponent even at his peak. Emperor, where is Hall Master Sun Ran? Why don't I see Hall Master Sun Ran? Don't tell me Hall Master Sun Ran is still trapped in the Two World Mountains? A Vice Hall Master of the 8th Divine Hall looked around and discovered that only his Divine Hall was missing a Hall Master, so he immediately began to worry. The other Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters clearly discovered Sun Ran's absence too, which perturbed many of them. They experienced an ill omen. Everyone, returned to the Darkstar Divine Hall. The Darkstar Emperor withdrew his gaze from Jian-Shin and tossed out that order indifferently before leading them away. In just a single step, he had already crossed 1,000 kilometers, making his way back to the capital city of the Darkstar race. The Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters could not help but look at one another when they saw how the Darkstar Emperor had actually avoided the topic of the 8th Hall Master altogether. They had not seen Sun Ran emerge from the Two World Mountains, which already led to an ill omen. With the Darkstar Emperor's behavior just then, it only intensified their ill feeling. In particular, the faces of the two Vice Hall Masters of the 8th Divine Hall had already become extremely warped. Afterwards, they rushed back to the capital city with uneasy emotions. Afterwards, the several dozen primordial realm experts mobilized from the 10 divine halls all rose up and took off towards the capital city in various groups. Along the way, the various hall masters all secretly asked Jian-Shin about Sun Ran's situation, as well as what happened in the Two World Mountains recently. Jian-Shin had already anticipated that they would ask this, so he repeated what he had told Do Wujin when he first saw him a few more times. They hall masters all fell silent after that. The situation might not be as bad as everyone imagines it to be. Sun Ran might have left the Two World Mountains a long time ago. If he's not in there, we obviously won't be able to find him. Feng Shui said softly. She struggled to believe that Sun Ran was already dead. After all, not only was he a primordial realm expert, but he was the master of a hall too. The death of a hall master, any hall master, would be an event large enough to shake up the entire race. Let alone hall masters, even the deaths of vice hall masters could shake up the entire race. That was because wars never occurred within the Darkstar world. The only conflict that caused bloodshed came from the group of outsiders. As a result, God King clansmen dying was a relatively normal event within the Darkstar race. However, the deaths of primordial realm experts rarely ever occurred throughout their history. The 10 divine halls hovered high above the capital city, representing the places of absolute authority within the Darkstar race. Above the 10 divine halls was another palace, hanging over them proudly as if it was gazing down on a group of warlords, even trampling viciously over the 10 divine halls that represented the greatest structure of authority within the Darkstar race. The palace was the most sacred place within the Darkstar race, the Darkstar Divine Hall. In the eyes of the outsiders, it was the imperial palace within the Darkstar race, the place where their emperor resided. But to the Darkstar race, it was the mental pillar of support for the entire race, where the soul of the entire race lay. It even took on the name of the race, revered as the Darkstar Divine Hall. Currently, all the Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters had already gathered within the Darkstar Divine Hall that loomed over the 10 Divine Halls. They all sat in their respective special seats. In a certain order, there were over 40 seats placed within the majestic hall. Apart from 6 that remained empty, the rest had already been filled. There were not any markers or names on the seats, but the seat of every Hall Master and Vice Hall Master was fixed. If it were not for Dou Wujin, Bing Yuan, and Taro's information, Jian Chen would not have even known where Kuan Tian sat. Sitting in his seat, Jian Chen's gaze swept past the 6 empty seats casually. He had already gained a rough idea of the owners of these seats. Apart from the one at the very front that belonged to Sun Ran, the 5 other empty seats at the back should belong to 5 other Primordial Realm experts within the Darkstar race. These 5 Primordial Realm experts did not take up any positions within the 10 Divine Halls. Instead, they served as the city lords for 5 cities among the 30 major cities of the Darkstar race. The Darkstar Emperor sat with his legs crossed on a throne above the hall. The throne was against a wall. He stared at Jian Chen calmly and asked with a voice filled with pressure that could not be defied, Kuan Tian, why did you enter the 2 World Mountains? Even if you've lost your memories and forgotten about the dangers of the 2 World Mountains, haven't the 3 Vice Hall Masters of the 5th Divine Hall told you about it? The Darkstar Emperor spoke extremely sternly. A few Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters familiar with the Darkstar Emperor's temperament could even sense the fury hidden within the Darkstar Emperor's solemn tone. It would be of no exaggeration to describe the fury as raging. Bing Yuan, Taro, and Dou Wujin's expressions all changed. They looked at one another and became rather unsettled. They could clearly sense that the Darkstar Emperor was currently experiencing a rare fit of anger. Your Majesty, the reason why I entered the 2 World Mountains despite the dangers was because I obtained a few memory fragments of the planetary beast out of sheer luck in the land of soul destruction. Even though the contents of the memory fragments are incomplete, they all point to the depths of the 2 World Mountains. I entered the 2 World Mountains to investigate these memory fragments, Jian Chen said. Then what about Sun Ran? He entered the 2 World Mountains with you. Was it also to investigate what was in the planetary beast's memories? The Darkstar Emperor continued to ask as his tone became rather sunken. Your Majesty, I entered the 2 World Mountains alone. As for why Hall Master Sun Ran entered the 2 World Mountains as well, I have absolutely no idea. If Hall Master Sun Ran had not exposed his presence in the 2 World Mountains, would not have even known he was in there, Jian Chen answered with composure. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28:10, An Unexpected Surprise. 1. The Darkstar Emperor only spoke after a moment of silence. Kuan Tian, tell me in detail what happened when Sun Ran's presence was exposed. Yes, Emperor. Jian Chen paused and recollections filled his eyes, as if he was thinking back to the various things that had happened a few days ago. Afterwards, he said slowly, only after Sun Ran's presence was exposed did I find out he had actually come to the depths of the 2 World Mountains, but I was extremely far away from him, so I don't know what exactly happened with him. All I know is that there was fighting in Sun Ran's direction due to the eruption of energy. Back then, I guess Sun Ran had probably encountered trouble, so I wanted to go over and assist him. However, when his presence was exposed, he had already alarmed all the regional king life-devouring beasts in the 2 World Mountains. Several dozen of them converged towards Sun Ran from all directions. The presences of some of the life-devouring beasts were so great that they even made me shudder. Under those circumstances, I obviously became afraid to approach Sun Ran. All I could do was conceal myself carefully and avoid being discovered by the life-devouring beasts. I have no idea what exactly happened with Sun Ran afterwards either. All I know was that soon after, the restless regional kings all settled down and made their way back to their territories. As for me, I followed the leads in the planetary beast's incomplete memory fragments to continue my search in the 2 World Mountains, Jian Chen said slowly. He explained what he saw as he recollected, remaining composed on the surface and calm inside. He did not give anything away, such that no one could connect his words to a story he had just spun up. Your Majesty, have you found any traces of our Hall Master? A Vice Hall Master of the 8th Divine Hall stood up. He was filled with worry and concern. The Darkstar Emperor said nothing. With just a flick of his finger, a space ring immediately shot into the air and began levitating under the support of an invisible power. When all the Primordial Realm experts gathered in the Darkstar Divine Hall saw this space ring, their faces all changed drastically. In that moment, all of them stared fixedly at the space ring in the air with widened eyes as their hearts surged. That was because they did not find the space ring unfamiliar at all. It was the one that Sun Ran wore on his finger. Space rings were never separated from their masters. Now that the 8th Hall Master had vanished, but the space ring he had worn for all these years had appeared here, everyone had a clear idea of what this implied. Hall Master. The 2 Vice Hall Masters of the 8th Divine Hall sobbed. They stared at Sun Ran's space ring in a daze, struggling to accept the end he had met. Many of the Hall Masters sighed again and again. They all felt very unsettled. A Hall Master had actually died. Who knew how many years it had been since this last occurred within the history of the Darkstar race? To the Darkstar race, this was something huge, enough to shake up the entire race. It was something sorrowful, enough for the entire race to mourn. The Darkstar Emperor remained neutral, making it impossible to tell what he felt. After a moment of thought, he continued to ask Jian Qin, Kuan Tian, since you've spent so much time searching the depths already under the guide of the planetary beast's memories, have you discovered anything? I have discovered some small things. Under the guide of the planetary beast's memories, I found a very small world in the depths of the 2 world mountains. In the miniature world, I obtained a small sliver of energy that is very likely to have come from the planetary beast, as well as some more incomplete memories, Jian Qin said. What? Kuan Tian, you've actually obtained some of the power left behind by the planetary beast? Is that true? The 10th Hall Master, Feng Shui, immediately beamed with joy and asked in a hurry when she heard that. The other Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters temporarily set Sun Ran's death to the side. Their gazes all gathered on Jian Qin, filled with jealousy and envy. The Darkstar race had many records on the planetary beast. It was a terrifying, colossal beast that had reached the 9th heavenly layer of Grand Prime. That was something beyond imagination to the Darkstar race right now. The strength of the power left behind by it was self-explanatory. For a moment, many Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters even became rather green with envy. The power left behind by the planetary beast, even just a small sliver, was a huge fortune enough to change the fates of people at their level. A streak of light even flashed across the Darkstar Emperor's eyes. As for why something that belonged to the planetary beast would appear in the depths of the 2 world mountains, they had already stopped considering this question, as the planetary beast stood in a realm that was simply too high, completely beyond the limits of their understanding. As a result, as long as it had to do with the planetary beast, no matter how unreasonable or illogical, they had absolutely no reason to doubt it. Their insight and understanding was still nowhere close to that level. Noticing everyone's scorching gazes, Jian Qin shook his head with a bitter smile. There's no need to look at me like that, everyone. I'm not certain whether the power in the miniature world actually comes from the planetary beast or not, as the power is extremely feeble. It can't even increase my cultivation. Haven't you noticed that I'm still at the 6th heavenly layer? With that, everyone sensed his cultivation closely and the scorching light in their eyes gradually died down. They had clearly sensed that Kuan Tian still remained at the 6th heavenly layer. A fortune that could not even allow him to break through a minor realm of cultivation, even if it came from the planetary beast, greatly diminished everyone's interest. Disappointment appeared clearly in Feng Shui's gaze too. As someone with grievances that ran deep with Kuan Tian, the heart of the 7th Hall Master Getti did indeed tighten when he heard that Kuan Tian had obtained some power left behind by the planetary beast, but noticing he still remained at the 6th heavenly layer, he immediately eased up again. At this moment, Jian Qin continued, however, what leaves me somewhat perplexed is that the memories of the planetary beast I obtained from the miniature world has to do with God King Grass. God King Grass? Continue. The Darkstar Emperor frowned. The Darkstar race had studied God King grass for countless years now, but the results they had achieved still made them worth nowhere close to how much the outsiders valued them. The records about God King grass in the planetary beast's memories are not detailed. After all, I only obtained an incomplete part of it. If I spend some time tidying through it, I might be able to produce a few leads. However, I'll need large quantities of God King grass to research and experiment with. If I really can find the method to make use of the energy in God King grass, it would be of extremely great significance to our race, Jian Chen said rather enthusiastically. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28:11, An Unexpected Surprise, 2. When the Hall Masters heard Jian Chen's words, their eyes immediately lit up, but that was all, as it was merely a method to make use of the energy within the God King grass. That was completely useless to people like them who were infinite primes. Though, this would bring quite the assistance to clansmen below the primordial realm. At the very least, they could stop treating God King grass as virtually useless trash in their hands. This was because what limited their breakthroughs was not energy, but their comprehension of the ways of the world. The residual will of the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits influenced the laws of the world that the Darkstar race dwelled in to a certain degree, or perhaps it set some new laws, acting as a form of suppression against the Darkstar race and riddling their comprehension of the ways with difficulties. However, the absorption of energy was unaffected. Kun Tian, surely you are aware that the thing inside God King grass that truly benefits us is not the energy, but the fragments of laws inside. Have you obtained anything to do with the method for absorbing these fragments of laws from the planetary beast's memories? The 10th Hall Master Feng Shui asked. She stared at Jian Chen fixedly as her eyes shone eagerly. With that, all the Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters turned their gazes towards Jian Chen too, all filled with scorching interest and anticipation. They could all vaguely sense the laws within high-grade God King grass, but over all these years, people who had managed to benefit from high-grade God King grass were basically mythical existences. Even if they managed to benefit from it, the effects were minimal, unable to strengthen them much at all. As a result, high-grade God King grass basically became useless trash among the Darkstar race in the end. There was nothing they could do with the grass, yet it was also a pity to simply throw it away. They could only demonstrate some effects in the hands of the outsiders. If the method that Kun Tian obtained from the planetary beast's memories could uncover the high-grade God King grass and allow them to absorb the fragments of laws within, it would be a joyous matter worth celebrating over for not only them, but the entire Darkstar race. Even though they still would not be able to break free from the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirit's will, unable to reach Chaotic Prime for the rest of their lives, it could make their breakthroughs among the 9 heavenly layers of Infinite Prime easier. As a result, Feng Shui's question immediately ignited the desires of all the primordial realm experts of the Darkstar race. Their eyes blazed brightly. Having reached this point, the gloomy atmosphere that filled the hall due to Sun Rant's fate had already been diluted. With their own interests presented right before them, the various Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters all chose to temporarily forget about Sun Rant's death. The only thought in their heads currently was to quickly increase their strength. Jian Chen smiled confidently. Since I've purposefully brought up the God King grass, it'll obviously be beneficial to us. Hall Master Feng Shui is completely correct. I have indeed obtained a method from the planetary beast's memory fragments that allows us to successfully comprehend all the power of laws contained with God King grass. However, this memory is incomplete, so I still need to play and experiment around with it. Kun Tian, is that really the case? Kun Tian, you mustn't lie to us. If you really can do it, you'll have done our Darkstar race a great service. As soon as Jian Chen stopped speaking, the Darkstar Divine Hall was immediately thrown into an uproar. The Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters there could no longer remain calm as they all ravished with joy. Even the Darkstar Emperor's eyes shone brightly as eagerness filled his face. He thought even further than everyone else. The Darkstar race was about to hold a great ceremony. Once the great ceremony succeeded, the Darkstar race should be able to break through this curse that prevented them from reaching Chaotic Prime if nothing went wrong. Once he reached Chaotic Prime and had Kun Tian's method assisting him, his cultivation would definitely surge ahead. He would reach the 9th heavenly layer of Chaotic Prime very soon. Once he reached the 9th heavenly layer of Chaotic Prime, new abilities would emerge as an endless stream for him. By then, he would be able to completely grasp a few ancient forbidden techniques that he was unable to practice due to insufficient cultivation. As a matter of fact, as his cultivation increased, he might even become able to guide the residual power left behind by the Grand Exalt of the Darkstar race alone and directly contend with the will left behind by the Grand Exalt of the Wood Spirits. By then, it would only be a matter of time before their Darkstar race broke out of this cage. But before all that, he had to reach the 9th heavenly layer of Chaotic Prime. Kun Tian, how many stalks of God King grass do you need to experiment around with? The Darkstar Emperor asked. He did not question Kun Tian either, as the Darkstar race had enjoyed peace for far too long, so long that even he, the Emperor, had set aside all of his suspicions and vigilance. Of course, the primary reason was because none of them could imagine that the Kun Tian they knew had already been replaced by someone else long ago. I need large quantities, preferably all high-grade God King grass. As for low-grade and mid-grade God King grass, the effects might end up being negligible, Jian Chen answered. All right then. Since you've grasped a method like this from the planetary beast's memories, you must do everything you can to complete this method. You mustn't waste even a moment. The 9 other divine halls must fully cooperate with Kun Tian, ordered the Darkstar Emperor. By fully cooperate, he obviously implied the 9 other divine halls had to provide Jian Chen with what he needed. That was because every single divine hall had stocked up quite a lot of high-grade God King grass. Yes, Emperor, the 8 hall masters all answered together. They were extremely straightforward, without any reluctance at all. High-grade God King grass was not particularly rare among the Darkstar race. Moreover, there was nothing they could do with it either. If Kun Tian really managed to find a method to comprehend the laws within the God King grass, then it would become a great opportunity for their strength to skyrocket. Seeing how everything unfolded so smoothly, Jian Chen was overjoyed too. Originally, he had only come up with his story of obtaining more memories from the planetary beast in the depths of the 2-world mountains on the spot, but he never expected the primordial realm experts of the Darkstar race to be so convinced by his words, giving him exactly what he wanted in such a simple manner. This was definitely an unexpected surprise. However, as soon as he considered the limited value of high-grade God King grass among the Darkstar race, Jian Chen came to an understanding too. Perhaps they had agreed so happily, without the slightest objection or suspicion, because it had something to do with the fact that God King grass was worth nothing in the eyes of these hall masters. In the end, the sorrow and seriousness that came from Sun Rant's death had been easily washed away by Jian Chen with the matter regarding the God King grass. After leaving the Darkstar Divine Hall, Jian Chen returned to the 5th Divine Hall and sat down on the Hall Master's throne calmly. Below him, Dou Wujin, Taro, and Bing Yuan stood side by side, reporting the events of the past few days to him. Hall Master, this is the God-tier heavenly resource offered up by the Heavenly Lightning Clan of the 100 Saints City. It's called the Glazed Fruit of Scarlet Blood, and it's a precious item specially for healing the soul. Bing Yuan presented the Glazed Fruit of Scarlet Blood as soon as he had the opportunity. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 28:12 An Unexpected Surprise. 3. Jian Chen waved his hand, and the glazed fruit of scarlet blood flew over automatically. He clutched this god-tier heavenly resource that might have been the first one brought in from outside over who knew how many years and could not help but smile mysteriously. Hall Master, please ingest the glazed fruit of scarlet blood immediately. It might be able to recover your lost memories, Bing Yuan said in a hurry. Having their Hall Master recover his memories had already become a mission of extremely great importance to the 5th Divine Hall. However, Jian Chen had no plans on ingesting the glazed fruit of scarlet blood. He fiddled around with the fruit as he said slowly, "This is indeed a god-tier heavenly resource. The outsiders in the 100 Saints City really haven't disappointed me. They've actually managed to deliver a god-tier heavenly resource into the Darkstar world despite the laws of the Grand Exalt. That would be something you are not aware of, Hall Master. The glazed fruit of scarlet blood was not at the god tier when it was brought into our Darkstar world. When this fruit was brought in, it had yet to reach the god tier. Instead, a clan called the Heavenly Lightning Clan in the 100 Saint City used pieces of jade that contained the laws of time to nurture the glazed fruit of scarlet blood to god tier, Bing Yuan explained. Pieces of jade that contained the laws of time? Jian Shen murmured softly as a smear of interest appeared in his eyes. Crystals of the laws of time that can hasten the growth of heavenly resources to god tier, yet they're not restricted by the passageway between the two worlds? Looks like I need to pay a personal visit to the 100 Saint City. Hall Master, the jade was wondrous, but the outsiders don't seem to be in possession of a lot of it, Bing Yuan said with a clasped fist. When he visited the 100 Saint City and the Heavenly Lightning Clan took out the pieces of jade that contained the seeds of time, he had deduced from the reactions of the representatives from the other dozens of clans that probably only the Heavenly Lightning Clan could produce the crystal, and clearly, they could not produce too much of it either. If their Hall Master wanted to obtain large quantities of this crystal, it would be virtually impossible. However, before Bing Yuan could finish, he was interrupted by Jian Shen, who raised his hand. We've never had any direct contact with the peak clans in the outside world. We've only learned a little about just how deep the heritage of these peak clans extend through a few words from the outsiders. Since we don't understand them, don't jump to conclusions so easily. The Hall Master is completely correct. It is Bing Yuan's outlook that is limited. Bing Yuan was ashamed. Just when Jian Shen wanted to continue, his expression suddenly changed, and he stopped talking. He looked towards the entrance of the Divine Hall. A few seconds later, a graceful figure entered the 5th Divine Hall slowly. She was the Hall Master of the 10th Divine Hall, Feng Shui. Even though she already seemed like a middle-aged woman in her 40s, she still possessed some of her past charm. Not only did she maintain her beauty from her youth, but she even gave off a sense of charm that could easily make men give in to their primitive urges. Kun Tian, have your memories still not recovered with the trip to the Two World Mountains? Feng Shui asked. Her gaze towards Jian Shen possessed a sliver of mixed emotion and dejection. She could clearly tell from Jian Shen's expression and gaze that the Kun Tian before her no longer remembered who she was, nor could he remember the past between them. Jian Shen shook his head. Welcome, Hall Master Feng Shui. Is there any way that Kun Tian can be of service? Feng Shui's gaze was locked on the Kun Tian that she found both familiar and unfamiliar. The depths of her eyes hid her love for him. Kun Tian, do you really have a way to transform the power of laws and high-grade God King grass into something that we can make use of? I'm not too confident in that, and I can't give you a guarantee right now, as the memory is incomplete. I'm missing a few crucial details. Everything still requires extensive experimentation and study, Jian Shen answered. I heard you require large quantities of high-grade God King grass for experimentation. Isn't the supply of your 5th Divine Hall enough? Feng Shui asked. Jian Shen's eyes flashed slightly as he shook his head gently. It's not enough, nowhere near enough. With a flip of her hand, a space ring appeared silently in Feng Shui's hand. She directly tossed the space ring to Jian Shen and said, This is all the high-grade God King grass my 10th Divine Hall has built up over the years. There's around 28,000 stalks in total. I'm giving them all to you right now. Jian Shen extended his hand to accept the space ring Feng Shui had tossed over. He was calm on the surface, but he was extremely excited inside. In his hands, 28,000 stalks of high-grade God King grass could potentially turn into 28,000 God Kings in an extremely short amount of time in his hands. And they would be perfect God Kings too, unlike the fake God Kings nurtured by the organizations of the 100 Saint City using 100 Tribulations God King pills. Those cultivators only had the lifespan of a century and only the cultivation, not the comprehension, of a God King. In the past, he had already taken away the 5th Divine Hall's entire supply of high-grade God King grass, which was over 30,000 stalks in total. With the 28,000 delivered by Feng Shui now, the number of stalks in his possession neared a terrifying 60,000. That was equivalent to 60,000 god kings. Even in the saints' world, this would be an extremely terrifying number. That was because not a single peak organization across the 49 Great Plains and 81 Great Planets possessed such a terrifying number of god kings. Jianchen took in a deep breath, clasping his fist towards Feng Shui to thank her. Feng Shui did not stick around for long. She left as soon as she delivered the high-grade God King grass. However, Feng Shui was definitely not the only one to visit the 5th Divine Hall today. Soon after Feng Shui had left, the Hall Master of the 2nd Divine Hall, Arna, came to the 5th Divine Hall too. Kun Tian, just how much confidence do you have in what you said in the Darkstar Divine Hall regarding the high-grade God King grass? After a simple greeting, Arna asked Jianchen eagerly. His eyes were completely glued to Jianchen, clearly concerned about this matter. I can't say how confident I am right now, as the memory lacks some crucial information, but I can attempt to patch it up through constant experimentation, Jianchen said. Arna fell into a momentary silence. His eyes flickered as he said after hesitating for a little while, Kun Tian, could you make this method public so that our 2nd, 8th, and 10th Divine Halls can also study it together? I'm confident that if we combine the strength of the 4 Divine Halls, we'll definitely make large breakthroughs quickly. Our 4 Divine Halls have always been of the same breadth and branch across all these years, contending against the 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, and 9th Divine Halls. We have been in a disadvantaged position in the first place, and combined with Sun Rant's death, which has weakened the 8th Divine Hall, it'll be even more difficult for the 4 of us to contend with the 5 Divine Halls. Increasing our strength within a short period using the God King grass is without a doubt our only way to make up for our disadvantage. Jianchen remained composed. He said steadily, I have considered that before, but it would be difficult to achieve. Why is that? The 2nd Hall Master Arna asked in confusion. That's because the contents of the memories I obtained from the planetary beast are incomplete. There are parts one understand, but it would be impossible to convey it using language. As a result, only I can experiment with the method of using God King grass right now. When he reached there, Jianchen paused for a moment. And, I believe that if we really can use the laws within God King grass, it won't just be a matter of our 4 Divine Halls, nor would it be possible for just the 4 of us to monopolize it. That's because it has already become a matter that affects our entire race. If we dare to keep it to ourselves, our people would probably be the last that the Emperor would spare. With that, Arna nodded in agreement. He let out a lengthy sigh. You're right. If that's the case, I can only await the good news. The only thing I can do is provide you with everything you need for researching the God King grass to the best of my ability. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28:13. Getti in despair. Arna left the 5th Divine Hall. However, seeing whether he could obtain the method to use God King grass from Jianchen was clearly only one of his reasons for visiting the 5th Divine Hall. Another reason was obviously to carry out the Darkstar Emperor's order. He needed to provide Jianchen with everything that he needed to the best of his ability. With that, he could hopefully come up with the method to comprehend the laws in the God King grass as quickly as possible. As a result, when he left the 5th Divine Hall, he left behind all the high-grade God King grass the 2nd Divine Hall had accumulated over the years. The total quantity was also around 30,000 stalks. The 5th Divine Hall already had a supply of over 30,000, and Feng Shui gave him everything that the 10th Divine Hall had accumulated over time, over 28,000 stalks. Combined with the 30,000 from the 2nd Hall Master Arna, the quantity of high-grade God King grass in Jianchen's possession right now had already reached approximately 90,000. If the organizations in the 100 Saint City learned about this, who knew how frightened they would become? And none of this was the low-grade God King grass that the people of the 100 Saint City possessed. They were all high-grade. So far, even the organizations of the 100 Saint City did not know about the existence of high-grade God King grass. They were unaware that God King grass was divided into 3 different grades among the Darkstar race. Seated on the Hall Master's throne, Jian Chen firmly held the space ring Arna had left behind. Neatly stacked inside were approximately 30,000 jade boxes. He struggled to remain calm. Only after quite a while did he suck in a deep breath and gradually calm down his stirring emotions. Afterwards, his gaze seemed to pass through the various structures and obstacles in the 5th Divine Hall, looking towards 7 other places among the 10 Divine Halls. His eyes flickered with a strange light. Never had I thought that I would be able to obtain 90,000 stalks of high-grade God King grass that's enough for people to throw their lives at one another in the Saints' world so easily. And this is just the supply from the 2nd, 5th, and 10th Divine Halls. If my estimations are correct, the other 7 Divine Halls should all possess 20 to 30,000 stalks each at the very least. Jian Chen thought to himself. The memories of the planetary beast he had obtained from the 2 world mountains was all fake, while being able to use God King grass to comprehend the fragments of laws inside was also fake. He did this in order to gather as many stalks of high-grade God King grass as possible, which would then allow him to use the high-grade God King grass to nurture God Kings after God Kings. Do Wuqing, Taro, Bing Yuan, please pay personal visits to the 7 other Divine Halls. Tell them that I require large quantities of high-grade God King grass. Request them to provide me with them as soon as possible, Jian Chen said to the 3 Vice Hall Masters below. Yes, Hall Master. Do Wuqing, Taro, and Bing Yuan were just about to leave to carry out the order. Wait. You must stress this has a direct connection to the futures of all Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters of the 10 Divine Halls, and it can affect the fate of the entire race. They must treat this with priority, Jian Chen added. He remembered how there was quite a lot of conflict going on among the 10 Divine Halls. The side he stood on was the same as the 5th Divine Hall, which had opposed 5 other Divine Halls for many years aside from the 1st Divine Hall. He had specially reminded them about this in order to prevent the 5 other Divine Halls from growing wary, or carrying out the Darkstar Emperor's order on the surface but opposing it in secret. He was basically indirectly elevating the importance of God King grass. Once it reached a level where it could influence the fate and future of the entire race, the various scuffles between the 10 Divine Halls would seem insignificant. At the same time, he mentioned how this had a direct connection to the futures of all the Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters of the 10 Divine Halls to band them all together, to clearly express to his opposition that if he succeeded, no one would be forgotten. Jian Chen had indeed racked his brains in order to obtain a few more stalks of high-grade God King grass. After accepting the order, Do Wuqing, Taro, and Bing Yuan immediately paid personal visits to the 7 other Divine Halls and passed on Jian Chen's message word for word. Among the 7 Divine Halls, the 8th Divine Hall originally under Sun Rant's command was the Divine Hall that agreed most happily, as they had always stood on the same front as the 5th, 2nd, and 10th Divine Halls. Due to Sun Rant's death, the 8th Divine Hall was momentarily leaderless. As a result, after Bing Yuan's visit, the 2 remaining Vice Hall Masters of the 8th Divine Hall made the decision themselves to give all their high-grade God King grass to the 5th Divine Hall. There were over 20,000 stalks too. In the 7th Divine Hall, Getti sat on his throne with a rather ugly expression. He stared coldly at Do Wuqing's figure that gradually drifted off into the distance, but his heart weighed heavily inside. The faces of his 3 Vice Hall Masters were rather ugly too. They stood below with mixed feelings, which contained envy, jealousy, and an intense reluctance to accept all this. Only after quite a while did Vice Hall Master Duff let out a long sigh. I have to admit that Kuan Tian's luck is envious. He actually got lucky with the planetary beast twice, obtaining the planetary beast's memories. With the first time, not only did he successfully reach the 6th heavenly layer, but his battle prowess became terrifying too. He had clearly just broken through recently, yet it seemed like he had broken through many years ago. And, the second time was even more impressive. He actually obtained some memories that can make comprehension of the fragments of laws in God King grass possible. If he completes the method, enough. Before Duff could finish, Getti bellowed out in irritation, interrupting Duff rudely. He bellowed out, "Don't mention the matter about the planetary beast in front of me. Don't mention anything about God King grass before me." Duff immediately stopped talking. He exchanged glances with the two other Vice Hall Masters. They could all see the deep powerlessness within each other's eyes. The strength that Kun Tian demonstrated in his battle with Getti last time was already chilling enough. He had only just reached the 6th heavenly layer, yet he was able to accomplish something like that against Getti, who had reached the 6th heavenly layer all those years ago. Once Kun Tian reached the limit of the 6th heavenly layer, who knew how powerful he would become? By then, they would not even know whether their hall master could suppress him like the past. Now, he had grasped the method of using God King Grass. If he actually uncovered the entire method successfully, then would their 7th Divine Hall still have any right to contend with the 5th Divine Hall? Even if the 5th Divine Hall made the method public, their 7th Divine Hall would not even be able to dream of contending with the 5th Divine Hall anymore. Go and fetch 5,000 stalks of high-grade God King Grass. Deliver them to the 5th Divine Hall. After a lengthy period of silence within the majestic 7th Divine Hall, Getti still ended up passing this order after an intense mental struggle. However, the moment he said that, Getti seemed like he had run out of strength. He deflated on his throne all of a sudden. He did not treasure the God King Grass. In the eyes of the Darkstar race, God King Grass was not precious at all. What truly drained Getti's strength was the 7th Divine Hall's future. He knew that the rise of the 5th Divine Hall had probably already become unavoidable now. As a person with the planetary beast's memories, as the first experimenter of God King Grass, Kun Tian would definitely get the first share of this, and it would be the greatest share. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28:14. Plundering. As he goes, the 10 divine halls of the Darkstar race did not follow any particular ranking. Divine halls that came first were not necessarily stronger. For example, the 5th and 7th divine halls. Even though the 5th divine hall ranked ahead of the 7th divine hall, the 7th divine hall had suppressed the 5th divine hall for all these years. Of course, there was one exception among the 10 divine halls, the 1st divine hall. The 1st Divine Hall truly ranked first among the 10 Divine Halls, as the 1st Hall Master was the only 7th Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime among the Darkstar race right now. The 7th Heavenly Layer already belonged to late Infinite Prime. Although it was only a minor realm of cultivation ahead of the 6th Heavenly Layer, there was indeed a clear divide between the two realms of cultivation. The 1st Hall Master was the expert only second to the Darkstar Emperor within the Darkstar race, as the Darkstar race did not possess any 8th Heavenly Layer Infinite Primes. Aside from the Darkstar Emperor at the 9th Heavenly Layer, the second strongest was the 1st Hall Master at the 7th Heavenly Layer. The other 9 Hall Masters all possess strength around the 5th or 6th Heavenly Layers. Currently, a grey-robed old man sat on the Hall Master's throne in the 1st Divine Hall. Even though he sat with his legs crossed, it was quite obvious from his small size that he definitely was an extremely short and skinny person. Moreover, he was extremely old, such that his wrinkles had already become indistinguishable from one another. His long, withered, grayish-white hair seemed to have lost most of its life force already, having fallen off in large chunks. As such, he seemed half-bald, with a large portion of his shiny scalp revealed. This old man was the 1st Hall Master, Qiu Changsheng. Beneath Qiu Changsheng stood 4 primordial realm experts. 3 of them were Vice Hall Masters of the 1st Divine Hall, while the last one was Vice Hall Master Do Wuqing from the 5th Divine Hall. In my knowledge, the 2nd and 10th Divine Halls have already handed all the high-grade God King Grass in their possession to your 5th Divine Hall. With the quantity from the 2 Divine Halls and what your 5th Divine Hall already possesses, you should have almost 100,000 stalks of high-grade God King Grass in your hands now. Is that still not enough to satisfy what you need for experimenting? The 1st Hall Master on the throne asked. His voice was extremely hoarse with age such that he seemed feeble. Hall Master Changsheng, you should know that the memories our Hall Master inherited are incomplete. In order to make up for the missing information, our Hall Master obviously needs to undertake tremendous amounts of research. High-grade God King Grass will definitely be depleted at an astonishing pace during the research process. Even all the high-grade God King grass in the possession of all 10 divine halls will be nowhere near enough. Otherwise, our hall master would have never sent me here, Do Wuqing said. He clearly felt admiration from the bottom of his heart towards the first hall master. He showed great respect towards him. So be it, so be it. Who can help the fact that Kun Tian came across this fortune in the Two World Mountains? The method he possesses right now affects the future of cultivation for all primordial realm members of our race. Given this, all we can do is provide our full support. I hope Kun Tian can fill in the missing parts soon. Do Wuqing, you can return for now. I'll send someone to deliver what Kun Tian requires in a while, said Xiu Changsheng. If that's the case, this junior will be taking his leave, Hall Master Changsheng. Do Wuqing bowed deeply towards the first hall master before leaving the first divine hall. Zhengfu, go fetch the high-grade God King grass in our storage. Qiu Qingsheng immediately ordered one of the vice hall masters below after Do Wuqing left. The vice hall master known as Zhengfu took a step forward and bowed. Hall master, our divine hall has a supply of 43,000 stalks of high-grade God King grass. How many should I retrieve? Deliver all of them to the 5th divine hall. Qiu Changsheng waved his hand and said in a feeble manner. All? Looking at it now, the high-grade God King grass should be of great use in the future, hall master. Are we really going to give the 5th hall master everything we've gathered over the years? Why don't we just give them a portion and keep some for ourselves instead? Zhengfu asked carefully. There's no need for that. The high-grade God King grass is completely useless with us anyway. After all, I've experimented around with it quite a lot over the years, but it's been completely impossible to make use of the fragments of laws inside to increase our strength. We might as well give them all to Kun Tian and hope he can complete the method sooner. Will high-grade God King grass become a treasure desired by all or remain as something useless just like before? This will be entirely up to Kun Tian. Over the next few days, the high-grade God King grass from the 10 divine halls all entered Jian Chen's hands. As such, the quantity in Jian Chen's possession easily broke 100,000 stalks. Among them, the first divine hall delivered the most God King grass, 43,000 in total. He had obtained 30,000 from the 8th divine hall too. As the 3rd, 4th, 6th, 7th, and 9th divine hall had always opposed the 5th divine hall, the God King grass they offered was the least. Even with the 5 divine halls combined, he had only obtained around 30,000 stalks from them. Now, the high-grade God King grass in Jian Chen's space ring had already reached 190,000 stalks. With so many stalks of high-grade God King grass in his possession, Jian Chen went from his initial excitement and joy to numbness. Yes, he was completely numb now. Even if the God King grass in his possession increased by several-fold now, it would be very difficult to excite him. This was because once the quantity reached a certain amount, it completely devolved into just a number. Of course, after collecting so many stalks of high-grade God King grass from the 10 divine halls, Jian Chen knew he had to do something no matter what. The action he took was very simple, which was locking himself up in his secret room and putting on an act like he was studying the high-grade God King grass. His research obviously would not lead to any results. It would not even have the slightest effect. However, he would toss out large quantities of destroyed high-grade God King grass from his secret room every day. In order to prove he would deplete God King grass rapidly during the research process, Jian Chen even went as far as to destroy up to 1,000 stalks of high-grade God King grass with each passing day. As for these destroyed stalks of high-grade God King grass, he obviously handed them to the 3 vice hall masters to deal with. Jian Chen's plan was very simple, which was to empty out the supply that the 5 opposing divine halls possessed. He estimated the 5 divine halls possessed 70 or 80,000 stalks at the very least, perhaps even more. At the same time, he could use this to set up a facade and decrease any suspicion towards him. Otherwise, if he collected all these stalks of high-grade God King grass and did nothing, that would be abnormal instead. The news that he depleted over 1,000 high-grade God King grass every day naturally reached the ears of the 9 other divine halls. The 8th hall master learnt about it very quickly, which left him breathless. At the same time, they became even more convinced that Kuan Tian had indeed obtained memories of the planetary beast in the Two World Mountains, particularly the incomplete memories regarding the high-grade God King grass. Jianshan remained in the secret room for 3 whole days before emerging. The first thing he did after emerging was gather the 3 Vice Hall Masters before directly passing down an order. After 3 days of research, I found something new. The fragments of laws in the high-grade God King grass come from the power after our ancestor passed away. As a result, if we want to awaken the slumbering fragments in the God King grass, we may require items that possess our ancestor's presence. I've spent a very long time thinking about this. Among the items with our ancestor's presence, there's probably nothing more suitable than the ancestral sacred earth. Do Wuqing, Tarot, visit the 9 divine halls immediately and tell them that I require ancestral sacred earth. Hall Master, our 5th divine hall still has some ancestral sacred earth. Originally, we planned to keep it for future exchanges with the outsiders, but if you need it, I can go fetch it right now, said Do Wuqing. It'll be nowhere near enough. I require large quantities of ancestral sacred earth. We can only gather enough if all 10 divine halls cooperate. Go to the 9 other divine halls immediately. You must pass on what I've said, Jianshan ordered. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28:15, Suddenly Wealthy, Yes, Hall Master. We'll go contact the 9 divine halls immediately. They dared not disobey the Hall Master, so all Do Wuqing and Tarot could do was carry it out. Afterwards, the 2 of them personally set off and visited the 9 divine halls again. Bing Yuan, how much ancestral sacred earth does our 5th divine hall have? Jianshan asked Bing Yuan after Tarot and Do Wuqing had left. Hall Master, our 5th divine hall has approximately 1.5 caddies of ancestral sacred earth right now. Bing Yuan clasped his fist. Only 1.5 caddies? Why is there so little? Jianshan frowned. Compared to the high-grade God King grass, the quantity of ancestral sacred earth was pitifully small. You may not remember the differences between ancestral sacred earth and God King grass, Hall Master. Within our race, God King grass of the different grades grow constantly. We have quite the harvest every century. Combined with the fact that we almost have no use for high-grade God King grass, we've obviously built up quite a supply over the years. As for ancestral sacred earth, not only is it even rarer than God King grass, but its formation is extremely gradual too. Aside from that, there's another important reason: the outsiders highly value ancestral sacred earth. Once it becomes available on the market, the outsiders will often offer astronomical prices and fight among themselves for the ancestral sacred earth. As a result, our race basically takes out some ancestral sacred earth to exchange with the outsiders every once in a while for what we need. As a result, none of the 10 divine halls have a particularly large supply of ancestral sacred earth. Bing Yuan explained to Jianshan patiently. After all, the hall master before him was still suffering from amnesia. He had completely forgotten about everything that happened in the past. Afterwards, before Jianshan could even give him the order, Bing Yuan took the initiative to retrieve all the ancestral sacred earth from the treasury, passing it to Jianshan politely. The ancestral sacred earth was placed in a high-quality jade box, which isolated all of its presence. It was impossible to sense its presence from the outside at all. Jianshan opened the box gently. After he had opened just a crack, surging vital energy immediately seeped out from the box. A dazzling, bright red glow had even formed from the gathering of pure vital energy. Jianshan remained composed. The pure vital energy in the jade box did not astound him, as he had witnessed something with even greater vital energy in the past in the depths below the ground on the desolate plain. That was the fleshly core of Gusta, one of 3 dark gold ape kings of the ancient great apes. Compared to Gusta's fleshly core, the vital energy in the ancestral sacred earth seemed insignificant. The only difference was the vital energy in the ancestral sacred earth was at an extremely high level of quality, and the vital energy seemed to contain the presence of Wei's. Only after inspecting the clump of blood-red ancestral sacred earth in the box did Jian Chen carefully place it into his space ring. He asked Bing Yuan, "How much of the ancestral sacred earth do you normally use to exchange with the outsiders?" "Hall Master, it takes an extremely long time for ancestral sacred earth to form, so whenever the 10 divine halls release ancestral sacred earth onto the market, it's always in extremely small quantities. Our race will probably exchange 2 to 4 taels of ancestral sacred earth with the outsiders over the course of a century," Bing Yuan said. 16 taels form a caddy, and an extremely rough approximation of a caddy is half a kilogram for metric and a pound for imperial. In other words, a caddy and a half would be 24 taels. Jian Chen was secretly shocked. Ancestral sacred earth was worth far more than he had imagined. He had never thought the outsiders would only obtain 4 taels of ancestral sacred earth at most from the Darkstar race over a century. Right now, he possessed a total of a caddy and a half of ancestral sacred earth. In other words, the outsiders would have to spend 600 years at the very least to obtain the same quantity of ancestral sacred earth from the Darkstar race. Below, Bing Yuan was hesitant. He hesitated for a very long time before finally gathering the courage to say reluctantly, "Hall Master, the fruit of nurturing ways the Emperor planted in the medicinal garden is currently evolving. Recently, the medicinal garden has been depleting divine crystals several dozen times faster than before. The divine crystals our 5th divine hall has gathered over the years is probably not enough to satisfy the medicinal garden. As for the outsiders in the 100 Saint City, they often offer extremely extravagant prices to purchase ancestral sacred earth. As a result, please forgive me for my boldness, but I'd like to request the Hall Master to save some ancestral sacred earth to exchange with the outsiders so that we can gather the divine crystals we need for the medicinal garden." Jian Chen raised an eyebrow and asked without concern, "How many divine crystals can you get from the outsiders with a tael of ancestral sacred earth?" "Several 100 million supreme-grade divine crystals at the very least. If the bidding war between the outsiders is intense, a tael of ancestral sacred earth can even fetch over 1 billion supreme-grade divine crystals," Bing Yuan said. His eyes shone slightly. Clearly, a sum of supreme-grade divine crystals that big interested even him. Although members of the Darkstar race were unable to absorb the energy in divine crystals for themselves due to the different energy they used, divine crystals were the only way to provide the medicinal garden with sufficient energy. That was because the medicinal garden was filled with heavenly resources that came from the saints' world. As a result, these heavenly resources required energy from the saints' world to grow. Even with Jian Chen's mental preparation, he leapt in fright when he heard the number, as that meant he now possessed wealth worth a sum of billions or even tens of billions of divine crystals. Even the divine crystals he had obtained from emptying out the treasuries of a few peak organizations on the cloud plane were nowhere close to this number. However, he also understood that only the Darkstar race would exchange something as valuable as ancestral sacred earth for divine crystals. If this were the saints' world, Jian Chen did not doubt at all that ancestral sacred earth would be treated as a rare treasure that never appeared on the market. It could not be purchased no matter how many divine crystals were offered. It was basically something that could only be exchanged for with treasures of the same value. However, now that the ancestral sacred earth was in his hands, why would he ever exchange something so precious for divine crystals? He said, "Leave the issue of the divine crystals to me. Come, accompany me to the 100 Saint City." In the Pantheon Divine Hall of the 100 Saint City, everyone had already gathered together. The many prodigies responsible for the entire city assembled once more. Apart from Chu Tian, Gong Ruiz, Kong Feiying, Zhou Ji, Zhao Wenbin, and the resplendent young master of the Dire Wolf clan who had obtained a grand exalt's legacy, Jin Hong, the other prodigies were all here. They did not talk with one another. All of their faces were extremely ugly, hiding a hint of extreme anger that had been repressed. However, no matter how emotional they were, none of them spoke up. The entire Pantheon Divine Hall was dead silent, which made the atmosphere seem extremely heavy. This was all because an uninvited guest had come to the Pantheon Divine Hall. Clearly, the various organizations were rather reluctant to welcome this uninvited guest, but due to certain reasons, they were forced to personally receive this guest of rather special status. And the reason why so many people were furious was because of where this guest currently resided. The representatives of the various organizations all sat around a large, round table in the Pantheon Divine Hall. There was no sense of order, which also represented that everyone stood on equal footing. Yet, the uninvited guest had taken a chair and levitated it 3 meters above the center of the table, sitting up there. This action was equivalent to trampling over all the prodigies in the Pantheon Divine Hall. As a matter of fact, it was possible to interpret this as sitting directly on top of all the prodigies in the Pantheon Divine Hall. Unfortunately, the many organizations of the 100 Saints City could only afford to be angered by this person's arrogance. They dared not speak up. That was because the uninvited guest was one of the 3 Vice Hall Masters of the 7th Divine Hall, Enlai. Enlai was a 4th Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime. Even within the Darkstar race, he was an expert that ranked extremely close to the top. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28:16. See Wuqing facing a 4th Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime. Even if all the organizations in the 100 Saint City banded together and unleashed everything in their grasp, they had no chance at fending him off. This was because they were unable to bring in any of the high-level secret treasures from their clans to the Darkstar world. As such, even arrogant prodigies like them who never took Infinite Prime seriously in the Saints' world were forced to submit obediently and treat them with caution. Even if they felt furious, they were forced to endure it. All of them understood a principle. If they were killed in the territory of the Darkstar race, then no matter how powerful the clans behind them were, it would still be impossible for them to avenge them. So what do you think? I need to make this clear with you all. My time is limited. I don't have so much time to waste here on you. Every organization must offer up 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals to our 7th Divine Hall every century in exchange for a friendly relationship. The 3 Vice Hall Masters of the 7th Divine Hall had pleaded arduously with the Hall Master for this condition. Don't waste it, Enlai said in an unconcerned fashion with one leg crossed over the other on the chair in the air. The fascinating expressions of the prodigies seemed to be beneath his attention. Instead, he inspected the Pantheon Divine Hall like no one was around. His gaze seemed to be able to pass through the Pantheon Divine Hall, allowing him to see all of 100 Saint City. This is a very impressive city. The price that went into building this city in the past was probably so great that it even took tremendous effort for the extremely wealthy clans behind you. Just this city alone is worth far more than a measly sum of 1 billion supreme-grade divine crystals. After all, in the resource-rich Saints world, supreme-grade divine crystals are a renewable resource. The supply is truly endless. In other words, 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals might sound like a lot, but it's actually nothing in the boundless Saints world. And, in the upcoming century, even if we ignore just how great of a deal you'll get with the resources you obtain from our race, the items you obtain from the 2 world mountains alone possess immeasurable value. If you calculate it like that, exchanging 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals for a century of peace is a very good deal, isn't it? Enlai spoke relaxedly as if 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals was nothing. However, the depths of his eyes hid burning desire. 10 billion divine crystals was definitely not a small sum to the 7th Divine Hall, as they often had to trade away a lot of ancestral sacred earth in the past to gather so many divine crystals. Most importantly, if the 7th Divine Hall possessed this sum of divine crystals, it would definitely be enough to deal with the urgent issue they currently faced. None of the prodigies said anything in the Pantheon Divine Hall. Their faces were terrifyingly sunken, as even to the colossal clans behind them, 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals was a tremendous sum. The Vice Hall Master of the 7th Divine Hall had demanded 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals right off the bat, and he only promised to avoid causing them any trouble for a century. This was no longer merely demanding an exorbitant price. Ha 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 ha, I didn't think Vice Hall Master Enlai would actually be here. Looks like I've come a step too late. At this moment, a great peal of laughter rang out, and a thunderous rumble followed. A great force had already smashed the firmly shut entrance to the Pantheon Divine Hall to pieces. Ripples of powerful energy wreaked havoc, sending all the prodigies in the Pantheon Divine Hall flying and crashing into the wall at the back in an extremely horrible spee. Even the huge, round table in the Pantheon Divine Hall shattered before the energy ripples. In the blink of an eye, the Pantheon Divine Hall had been reduced to a mess. A man in white had suddenly barged into the Divine Hall. The man seemed to be in his 30s. His facial features were delicate, and he seemed rather refined, like a scholar. However, the presence he emitted was the same as Enlai's, also at the fourth heavenly layer of infinite prime. Enlai squinted slightly, and his face immediately became rather ugly. And I was wondering who it was. As it turns out, it's Vice Hall Master Si Wuqing of the 6th Divine Hall. Si Wuqing, hasn't your 6th Divine Hall always treated the 100 Saint City as something beneath your attention? Apart from a few occasional exchanges, your Divine Hall hasn't cared about the 100 Saint City at all over all these years. So why has your 6th Divine Hall suddenly changed today, sending a mighty Vice Hall Master like you to pay a personal visit to this place? By now, the prodigies the energy had sent flying all climbed up. They gazed at the obliterated entrance of the Pantheon Divine Hall, and their hearts immediately sank completely. Recently, their 100 Saint City had obtained the protection of the 5th Divine Hall. Combined with how the 7th Divine Hall never came to make trouble for them again, they gradually dropped their guard. They had maintained an entrance in the protective formation for people to enter and leave the city, just so the city could remain in operation. Unexpectedly, the Vice Hall Master of the 7th Divine Hall had snuck his way in through this gate silently despite his status, directly coming to the Pantheon Divine Hall and stating exorbitant demands for 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals. If it were Enlai, then it would not have been too horrible. After all, he had not used any brute force. There was still room for negotiation. However, the person who had come just now was not as amiable. He destroyed the main entrance as soon as he arrived, leaving all the prodigies unsettled. Right now, they even began to wonder whether there had been some great social upheaval in the Darkstar race that made the 5th Divine Hall lose all of its authority. Had the personal promise of the 5th Hall Master become so worthless that any old Vice Hall Master could simply walk over it? Vice Hall Master Si Wuqing of the 6th Divine Hall smiled and said slowly, "Indeed. In the past, our 6th Divine Hall had never cared about the existence of the 100 Saint City, as in our eyes, the 100 Saint City is merely an ant. It's beyond what our 6th Divine Hall can be bothered with. Moreover, this ant can even provide us with what we needed from time to time, so we're obviously happy for it to exist. However, the situation today is rather different, because that has greatly depleted the divine crystals of our 6th Divine Hall. Although there are some other tiny ants serving our 6th Divine Hall, the divine crystals those tiny ants can offer is far too little. It would have been enough in the past, but given the current circumstances, the divine crystals they can provide are nowhere near enough to keep up with the demand. As a result, with no other choice, all we can do is come to the 100 Saint City," said Si Wuqing. "That's obvious. The outsiders who work with your 6th Divine Hall are mostly organizations with chaotic primes in the Saints' world. Even if some of them have a few grand primes, they all rank towards the bottom among peak organizations. Of course they can't be compared to these organizations of the 100 Saint City," Enlai said nonchalantly before changing the topic. "Si Wuqing, may I ask what your 6th Divine Hall plans on exchanging with them for the divine crystals?" "Exchange? No. Enlai, you'd be taking it too far with our 6th Divine Hall if that's what you think. How come only your 7th Divine Hall is able to demand divine crystals from the 100 Saint City for free, while our 6th Divine Hall must exchange items in return? Wouldn't that just mean our 6th Divine Hall is not as great as your 7th Divine Hall? If your 7th Divine Hall was stronger than us, then sure, we'd accept it. But in reality, our 6th Divine Hall is still slightly stronger than your 7th Divine Hall. Isn't that correct?" Si Wuqing said in a deliberately ambiguous manner. "If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28:17. The major player arrives and Lai's face sank slightly. Originally, he had already been prepared to take everything that the 100 Saints City could offer up for himself. He believed that while not all of the several dozen peak organizations stationed in the 100 Saints City would be willing to pay up such a great sum of divine crystals in exchange for peace, at least a third of them would. Even if it were only a third of the organizations, the amount of divine crystals they could gather would be an astronomical sum. Not only would it cover the 7th Divine Hall's sudden increase in demand for divine crystals because of the medicinal garden, but it would also leave them with quite a lot to exchange with the other divine halls, or perhaps they could build up a reserve supply for the future. After all, they had to maintain the medicinal garden, so the consumption of divine crystals would be endless. The Darkstar race could never have enough divine crystals. But, never did he imagine that Wuqing would actually show up at a time like this, clearly demanding a share as well. Without a doubt, this had directly halved what Enlai was expecting to receive. Obviously, Enlai became extremely displeased. Wuqing, for this millennium, our 7th Divine Hall is in power. The various matters of the Darkstar race, regardless of size, are to be handled by our 7th Divine Hall. The actions of your 6th Divine Hall are crossing the line a little, Enlai said with a sunken face. With everything up for grabs, he absolutely refused to give up on any part of it. Although the 6th and 7th Divine Halls had always stood on the same side, a few sparks would still fly when great benefits were presented before them. In particular, with how the supply of divine crystals for every divine hall had become critically low, getting a share of this had only become even more precious. That's correct. Your 7th Divine Hall is indeed responsible for governing the Darkstar race this millennium. Though, why did I hear that when your 7th Hall Master personally set off to destroy the 100 Saints City, he had been forced to stop because of the 5th Hall Master's appearance? Your 7th Divine Hall has even given some leeway to our old rival, the 5th Divine Hall, yet you treat us, your old ally, so heartlessly and selfishly? Is our relationship as allies beneath your relationship with the 5th Divine Hall? Or should I ask, just which side is your 7th Divine Hall standing on? Wuqing smiled faintly, remaining composed and unconcerned the entire time. He continued, Enlai, I don't want to continue mouthing off with you here. The 6th Divine Hall only has one demand. We want half of the divine crystals that the 100 Saints City offers up. Afterwards, Wuqing's gaze shifted to the back of the Pantheon Divine Hall, at the various organizations who had gathered together in a horrible shape. He said indifferently, listen up. It's like what Enlai said earlier. Every clan must provide 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals to us. In exchange, it'll be the same as what Enlai said before. During this period, the 7th Divine Hall won't target you anymore, nor will they obstruct you in any way or form. Otherwise. Wuqing's expression suddenly coldened and killing intent shot from his eyes. He said frigidly, don't even think about appearing among the Darkstar race again. The killing intent of a primordial realm expert immediately made the temperature throughout the entire Divine Hall plummet. The prodigies gathered there all felt like they were standing in a cavern of ice as a chill ran down their spines. This was not because they were timid, or because they were frightened. Instead, it was an ordinary reaction when God Kings faced the killing intent of a primordial realm expert. The expressions of the prodigies in the Pantheon Divine Hall became ugly. 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals in exchange for a century. This was a sum that many of them could not provide. As peak organizations, they were indeed extremely wealthy, but they exhausted extremely large amounts of resources too. Enlai and Wuqing's request basically forced many of them into dire straits. Yet, they happened to be afraid to speak up, as in the Darkstar world, the statuses they prided themselves for in the Saints world meant absolutely nothing. Even if they died, nothing would happen. No one would avenge them. Esteemed Hall Masters, there's something I'd like to ask, if I am permitted to do so. At this moment, Lei Yun of the Heavenly Lightning clan stood forward. He did not possess the arrogance of a descendant of a peak clan at all anymore. Instead, he was rather courteous and extremely careful. Wuqing's gaze landed on Lei Yun, and his lips slowly curled into a sinister smile. The clan you come from seems to be the Heavenly Lightning clan, right? I heard you possess some special methods and forcefully nurtured a heavenly resource to God tier. Impressive, very impressive. Our race has always admired the outside organizations that are capable. What do you have to say? You can be frank. Lei Yun paused for a moment before saying reluctantly, since the esteemed Hall Master already knows about the God tier heavenly resource, the esteemed Hall Master must also know that our Heavenly Lightning Clan specially prepared the heavenly resource for the 5th Divine Hall. Oh, yes, I do know about that. And then? Si Wuqing stared at Lei Yun in a mysterious manner. The 5th Divine Hall has promised that if we can provide him with God tier heavenly resources that can heal his soul, the 5th Divine Hall will protect us. Now that we've already offered up a God tier heavenly resource, we should now be under the protection of the 5th Divine Hall according to the agreement. Now that the 6th and the 7th Divine Halls are making such a great ruckus here, wouldn't the 5th Divine Hall? Towards the end, Lei Yun began to falter. There were certain matters he could not go into too much detail about, but basically everyone understood what he was saying. The 5th Divine Hall? You're still relying on the 5th Divine Hall holding up their promise right now? Si Wuqing stared at Lei Yun like he was looking at an idiot. He said, in the past, the 5th Divine Hall might have been able to protect you, as their 4 Divine Halls would be enough to contend with us. But now, it's impossible for their 4 Divine Halls to contend with us anymore. After a pause, perhaps Si Wuqing did not find his words particularly persuasive, so he continued. He began to boast. I'll tell you the truth. Since our 6th Divine Hall has decided to become involved with the matter of the 100 Saints City, and we're working together with the 7th Divine Hall, the 5th Divine Hall has completely lost the ability to protect you. Right now, even if the 5th Hall Master himself, Kun Tian, was here, he probably would not dare to speak up to our 2 Divine Halls. It's hilarious to think that you're still depending on the 5th Divine Hall's protection. How ignorant. Really? How come this Hall Master doesn't know the 6th and 7th Divine Halls are actually so capable enough to make this Hall Master shut up before you? I'd really like to witness for myself and see if your 6th and 7th Divine Halls actually possess this ability or not. However, as soon as Si Wuqing finished speaking, a cold, mocking voice rang out from outside. The appearance of this voice immediately made Si Wuqing's face freeze up. His expression immediately stiffened because he knew exactly whose voice this was. It was the 5th Hall Master he had mentioned moments prior, Kun Tian. And Lai's expression changed once again in the Pantheon Divine Hall. Suddenly, he turned around and looked in the direction of the main entrance. He saw the 5th Hall Master Kun Tian striding over through the air steadily, with his presence completely concealed. Behind him, Vice Hall Master Bing Yuan concealed his presence too, following along closely and silently. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28:18, Face slapping. The arrival of the 5th Hall Master immediately filled the despaired and helpless prodigies with a shred of hope. All of them became emotional, and their gloomy faces riled up instantly. They had begun treating the 5th Hall Master as the person they relied on the most in the Darkstar race from a long time ago. Even though they knew they would not receive his protection if they could not offer up the God-tier heavenly resources that he demanded, they still placed great recognition and belief in him. After all, the 5th Hall Master had saved their lives in the past, even willing to take on the risk of going to war with the 7th Divine Hall to save them. With the kindness he had shown, the prodigies of the 100 Saints City clearly trusted the 5th Hall Master even more. On the other hand, looking at the 6th and 7th Divine Halls, not only had the former taken the 100 Saints City away from them, but they had almost destroyed them too. As for the latter, they had smashed the entrance of the Pantheon Divine Hall as soon as they arrived, behaving arrogantly and looking down on them all. They had completely treated them as lambs to the slaughter, showing nothing but ill intent. Compared to them, the 5th Divine Hall was like a benevolent god. They were worth relying on and trusting. Esteemed Hall Master, you've finally come. You have to help us, sir. Our 100 Saints City has clearly obtained your protection, so anyone who injures the people of our 100 Saints city is equivalent to injuring you. However, despite knowing our relationship with the 5th Divine Hall, the 6th and 7th Divine Halls have still threatened us, without even thinking about the 5th Divine Hall, even forcing us to cough up 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals each century. They're basically leaving us with no choice at all. Lei Yun was the most riled up out of them, as well as the first one to speak up eagerly, kowtowing up to the 5th Hall Master. This was because their Heavenly Lightning clan had presented the 5th Divine Hall with a god-tier heavenly resource as promised. Technically, their Heavenly Lightning clan was already under the 5th Divine Hall's protection. With such a powerful backing, he finally gained a bit of confidence when he faced the 10 Divine Halls of the Darkstar race. As for Si Wuqing's blatant disdain and mockery of the 5th Divine Hall, Lu Yun only treated it as a series of boasts. After all, he could tell with a single glance of the 5th Hall Master's expression right now that the 5th Divine Hall situation was nowhere near as bad as Si Wuqing had described. With what Lei Yun said, a sliver of coldness immediately flashed through Si Wuqing's eyes as heavy killing intent rose up inside. In his eyes, all outsiders were existences like ants, creatures he could crush at a whim. If they were obedient and constantly brought benefits to the Darkstar race, he could allow them to move around in his territory. But now, someone that was an insignificant ant in his eyes was actually trying to ruin his relationship with the 5th Hall Master. This was well beyond what he could allow to happen. You're looking to die. Si Wuqing spat out those words coldly. He was about to kill Lei Yun on the spot when his face changed drastically all of a sudden. This was because a mountainous presence descended suddenly, weighing on him such that his entire body sank. Even the circulation of energy in his body showed signs of sluggishness. Si Wuqing turned around and stared at Kuan Tian with difficulty. There was dread in his eyes. After all, not only was Kuan Tian the master of a divine hall, but his strength had reached the 6th heavenly layer of infinite prime. He trounced him in both status and strength. However, he soon seemed to remember something. The dread in his eyes vanished instantly, and his heart settled down too. He said sternly, Kuan Tian, what do you think you're doing? Not only does this person have no respect, but he's actually trying to sow conflict into the relationship between us divine halls with his lowly status. Doesn't he deserve to be killed? Don't tell me you even plan on protecting someone like that, Hall Master Kuan Tian? Si Wuqing was fearless, staring directly at Jian Chen. He behaved like he would never back down unless he received a satisfying explanation. This was because he firmly believed the side which the 5th Hall Master stood on, the side that had already been weaker, had weakened once again after losing the power of the 8th Hall Master. They should not have been bold enough to directly contend with them like in the past anymore. Otherwise, they would just be asking for humiliation. Vice Hall Master Enlai stood to one side silently. He had no plans on becoming involved with the dispute between Si Wuqing and the 5th Hall Master. His fear towards the 5th Hall Master did not diminish at all with Sun Rant's death. This was because he had personally witnessed the 5th Hall Master go crazy before. Having lost his memories, the 5th Hall Master was instead even more terrifying than in the past, even less of a person they could afford to provoke. Not only had his strength increased qualitatively, but his personality seemed to have become extreme too. Once he lost his temper, he would actually throw his life at others. Faced with a madman like that, even the 7th Hall Master Getti, who was much stronger than Kuan Tian, was forced to take a step back. Jian Chen said nothing. He walked through the Pantheon Divine Hall at a regular pace, arriving in front of Si Wuqing steadily. His powerful presence continued to crush down on Si Wuqing before he raised a hand and directly slapped Si Wuqing across the face. Smack! A crisp sound rang out immediately. It was far too resonant, such that it was ear-splitting in the Pantheon Divine Hall. Caught off guard, Si Wuqing had been directly sent flying by Jian Chen's slap. Jian Chen's slap was extremely powerful, lifting all of Si Wuqing into the air. Half of his face had been reduced to a pulp as blood splattered everywhere. The Pantheon Divine Hall immediately became dead silent. The prodigies there watched as Si Wuqing sailed across the air, their hearts thumping vigorously. Everyone had been stunned. As convention went, it was fair to hit others, just not their faces. Not only had the 5th Hall Master slapped someone across the face, but the person he hit was even a revered Vice Hall Master. His actions left an extremely heavy impact on the prodigies. Primordial Realm experts, even just an Infinite Prime, were equivalent to elders in peak organizations with Grand Primes. They enjoyed a certain level of status and deserved a certain level of respect. In the Darkstar world, Primordial Realm experts were already regarded as figures who stood at the very apex, standing above everyone else. They possessed extremely revered statuses, yet he had just been slapped across the face mercilessly like this. This scene left all the prodigies rather dazed. And Lai on the side was left completely dumbstruck too. His entire brain seemed to stop working. Conflict among the Primordial Realm experts of the Darkstar race was very common, and full-blown battles happened from time to time too. However, it would all be in a controlled range. Being directly slapped across the face as a Primordial Realm expert, like what had happened right now, had definitely never happened before. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28-19, absolutely fearless gazing at the 5th Hall Master who simply stood there coldly and unworried, and Lai's throat actually became rather dry for a moment. The main reason why he was bold enough to come to the 100 Saint City was because of Hall Master Sun Rant's death, which had drastically weakened the faction that the 5th Divine Hall was a part of. They no longer possessed the ability to contend with them. In his belief, the 5th Divine Hall would probably take a step back given the situation it was in when the 100 Saint City faced any issues, as long as it did not severely harm their interests. Yet, he never expected the 5th Divine Hall to completely ignore the logical course of action. Despite their faction already at an extremely great disadvantage, not only did he show no intentions of holding himself back, but he was even wilder than before instead. He actually slapped a Vice Hall Master across the face as soon as he arrived. This was something extremely humiliating. Even if grievances did not exist between them, bitter hatred would still arise from this. He's mad. He's mad. Kuan Tian has completely lost his mind. And Lai could only curse inside. The high-handedness and haughtiness that the 5th Hall Master demonstrated right now made him think of retreating. The slap had left Vice Hall Master Wuqing stunned too. Jian Shen had sent him flying, and he actually forgot to climb back up when he fell on the ground. His face had completely blanked out, still yet to recover his senses. Only after 5 whole seconds did Wuqing finally respond. He remained in the same posture on the ground, except his body began to tremble violently. His eyes became bright red in that instant, completely bloodshot. In the next moment, surging fury and terrifying killing intent suddenly erupted from him. He leapt up from the ground violently, and his face became hideously twisted. He roared like a wild beast, "Kuan Tian, how dare you humiliate me like this? I will make you pay." In the Darkstar race, Vice Hall Masters were figures of revered status. Even though a certain disparity existed between them and Hall Masters, this disparity was not as great as Jian Shen imagined it to be. After all, everyone was infinite primes. They were all at the same realm of cultivation, not to mention that Wuqing was a 4th heavenly layer infinite prime at that. That kind of strength was only one minor level of cultivation lower than a few Hall Masters who still remained at the 5th heavenly layer. Boom! Immediately, Wuqing erupted with energy as the pressure of the primordial realm flooded out. With a pair of bloodshot eyes, he directly attacked Jian Shen, swinging the sword in his hand towards Jian Shen resolutely. Jian Shen remained calm and composed. Only a tremendous pressure erupted violently like a mountain, crushing down on Wuqing in a way even more terrifying than last time. Wuqing staggered, almost falling over. His face paled, and the light and energy on the sword he swung towards Jian Shen flickered. Jian Shen's presence had actually subdued the power of his attack to the greatest degree such that Jian Shen managed to catch the sharp tip easily and calmly between 2 fingers. Ding! Afterwards, there was a crisp sound. Jian Shen flicked his fingers gently, and the sharp tip between his fingers immediately began to tremble violently like it had sustained a heavy blow. At the same time, a force moved through the sword, reaching Si Wuqing's sword-wielding hand, immediately turning his entire right arm numb. However, Jian Shen had no plans of letting Si Wuqing go like this. He said coldly, "You're merely a vice hall master, so how dare you directly refer to this hall master by name? You deserve to be punished for insubordination." As he said that, he approached Si Wuqing with a step and suppressed him with his presence before landing another slap on Si Wuqing's face and mercilessly sending him flying a second time. This time, he smacked the other half of Si Wuqing's face. Not only did the great force turn Si Wuqing's face into a blood pulp, but even cracks appeared in his skull. Si Wuqing was filled with hatred. He raised his head and roared out furiously, like a vicious beast wanting to launch a counterattack. However, Jian Shen was much more powerful than he imagined him to be. Against Jian Shen, not only was he in no shape to fight back despite his strength at the fourth heavenly layer of infinite prime, but he could not even dodge after being suppressed. I took back the 100 Saints City from Getti. Only I can decide the fate of the 100 Saints City. Other divine halls have no right to this. As a vice hall master of the 6th divine hall, not only have you come to my territory to flaunt your powers, but you've even spoken insolently about me. You cannot be forgiven. Jian Shen said coldly. He arrived in front of Si Wuqing with a flash, directly stomping down heavily on his back before Si Wuqing could even climb up. The cracking sound of bones rang out. Jian Shen had shattered Si Wuqing's backbone with that, his foot reaching as far as his ribs. Basically all the bones in Si Wuqing's upper half had been crushed. His organs were in pieces. Si Wuqing let out a grunt and coughed up large amounts of blood, along with pieces of organs. This time, he had truly been heavily injured. "Kuan Tian, how dare you treat me like this?" Si Wuqing sprayed out with blood a few times as he said hoarsely. By now, his face had become pale white, and his hair was in a mess. His impressive bearing and demeanor from earlier had vanished a long time ago. "Let alone you, even if your 6th hall master comes and dares to provoke me, I'll still give him a thorough beating," Jian Shen said coldly, radiating with fearlessness. Afterwards, he picked up the mess that Si Wuqing was from the ground and directly hurled him out of the 100 Saints City. "Remember, the 100 Saints City is a place under my protection. Without my permission, no one is allowed to make trouble here. I won't spare anyone who does that." Outside the 100 Saints City, Si Wuqing, who had been squashed like a pancake, struck the ground in an extremely horrible shape. Due to being thrown out with far too much speed, he skid along the ground for several kilometers before finally stopping. Blood immediately spurted from his mouth. His spine had been crushed. Barely any of his bones in the upper half of his body were unbroken. Without the support of his bones, he was unable to stand up immediately, so all he could do was lay on the ground and ingest a few recovery pills he had in his space ring to heal. "Kuan Tian," he let out a beast-like howl as his hatred and killing intent surged to the limit. He rested for a moment until his shattered spine began holding together before immediately taking off into the air, tottering away from here. In the Pantheon Divine Hall, after personally witnessing how Jian Shen crushed Si Wuqing, and Lai's heart immediately became icy cold. He discovered he had still ended up underestimating the madness of the 5th Hall Master. In just a few seconds, he had actually reduced a Vice Hall Master to such a miserable, humiliating state over something so small. Chills even began running down his back. This was because nothing like this had ever happened to the primordial realm experts of the Darkstar race throughout their known history. At this moment, Jian Shen's gaze landed on Enlai. It became extremely sharp as he said coldly, "Enlai, have you come to make trouble in the territory under my protection too?" No. You've misunderstood, Hall Master. I only came to the 100 Saints City to exchange some divine crystals with the organizations here. Since you're now here, Hall Master, I'll take my leave." Faced with Jian Shen's cold questioning, Enlai chose to yield without any hesitation at all. With the example he had made out of Si Wuqing, why would he still try to hold his ground? "If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. At this moment, under the gazes of all the prodigies, Enlai could no longer bother with the issue of humiliation. He smiled apologetically and amicably, speaking in a very passive tone. He explained to Jian Chen meekly to clear up the misunderstanding. Afterwards, he did not stick around for another second longer. He left the Pantheon Divine Hall with his tail between his legs, flying away from the 100 Saints city like he was fleeing. Even though Enlai felt his behavior at the end in front of the prodigies was very humiliating, damaging his dignity as a vice hall master, he shivered at the thought of the fate that Si Wuqing suffered. Whatever. Even though it's a little humiliating, it's nothing compared to what Si Wuqing went through. Enlai comforted himself inside. At the same time, he became extremely fearful of the Fifth Hall Master's fearlessness and unruliness. I need to report everything that happened in the 100 Saints city as it had occurred to the Hall Master as soon as possible. The Fifth Hall Master's way of handling matters is becoming more and more overbearing. He doesn't consider the consequences at all. If he continues like this without holding himself back, an unprecedented conflict will probably erupt between the 10 divine halls. A mighty vice hall master with revered status had actually been slapped in front of a group of outsiders. The entire matter was horrible, and the consequences would be far too severe. With a heavy heart, Enlai flew quickly at a high altitude, reaching the Dark Knight's city as quickly as he could before returning to the 7th Divine Hall through the teleportation formation there. In the 7th Divine Hall, Getti sat on his throne in a rather anxious manner, worrying over the matters regarding the divine crystals. Below him, Vice Hall Master Duff stood with his arms by his side and said, "Hall Master, the rate at which the fruit of nurturing ways absorbs divine crystals has multiplied yet again, and it's still increasing. The time our divine crystals can provide is only decreasing. Around how much longer can they last?" Getti sat on his throne and asked with a slight headache. Their Darkstar race had never suffered a shortage of divine crystals like today. In only a few months, the fruit of nurturing ways had consumed enough divine crystals to maintain the medicinal garden for a millennium. This was actually because the energy required for the fruit of nurturing ways to become a high-grade heavenly resource was far too startling. Moreover, the origin energy their Darkstar race used was different from the Saints' world, so it could not nourish the fruit of nurturing ways. They could only rely on divine crystals to provide it with the energy it required. Naturally, divine crystals were depleted at an extremely startling rate. Less than 10 days. Duff paused before adding, and the 10 days are calculated based on the current rate the fruit of nurturing ways is absorbing energy at. This will definitely become much faster tomorrow, and it might even increase the day after tomorrow. As a result, we don't even have enough divine crystals to last 10 days. How many divine crystals have the outsiders under our control provided us with? Getti asked again. Every single divine hall cooperated with a few outside organizations that were weaker than the ones in the 100 Saints city, undertaking various transactions for their benefit. They've provided us with quite a lot, but they'll last for a few days at most, said Duff. Getti leaned against the throne and rubbed his temples rather painfully. We've all miscalculated. Who would have thought the fruit of nurturing ways would require several dozen times, or even 100 times, more energy than when it evolved to mid-grade last time? The other heavenly resources require nowhere near that much. We can only rely on Enlai now. Let's hope he achieves some success in the 100 Saints city. At this moment, the teleportation formation outside the 7th Divine Hall flashed. Enlai had returned from the 100 Saints city. Getti's face immediately lit up. He began to eagerly ask Enlai about the results of his trip to the 100 Saints city before he could even step into the hall. Very soon, Getti learnt about everything that had happened in the 100 Saints city. His face immediately changed, becoming extremely solemn with a hint of fury. He growled sternly, "How dare Kun Tian take it so far? He's crossed the line. He's towing our bottom line with this. How can a vice hall master for heaven's sake go through so much humiliation? Vice Hall Master Si Wuqing dragged his heavily injured body back to the 6th Divine Hall. He currently stood in the hall with his face covered in blood. His eyes were completely bloodshot as chilling killing intent radiated from his body. He was currently telling everyone how domineering and haughty the 5th Hall Master Kun Tian had been in the Pantheon Divine Hall. Kun Tian has truly gone too far. He actually humiliated a Vice Hall Master of our 6th Divine Hall to such a degree. He didn't just slap Si Wuqing's face, he slapped the face of our 6th Divine Hall too. Will our 6th Divine Hall still have any dignity if we don't get revenge? The 2nd Vice Hall Master of the 6th Divine Hall was exasperated as he said angrily. He resembled Si Wuqing slightly in appearance. He was Si Wuqing's elder brother by blood, Si Wuqing, also a 4th Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime. Apart from the brothers Si Wuqing and Si Wuqing, there was the 3rd Vice Hall Master, Guqing. He was a 2nd Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime and was also fuming. Out of the 3 Vice Hall Masters of the 6th Divine Hall, 2 were 4th Heavenly Layer Infinite Primes and 1 was a 2nd Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime. Their strength completely surpassed the 5th and 7th Divine Halls. As for the 6th Hall Master Irvin, he was a 6th Heavenly Layer Infinite Prime, and he had even broken through to this realm before the 7th Hall Master Getti. The 6th Hall Master Irvin sat on his throne emotionlessly. His face was icy cold as he said frigidly, "Send invitations to the Hall Masters of the 3rd, 4th, 7th, and 9th Divine Halls. We need to avenge Si Wuqing for the humiliation he suffered. Kun Tian must pay for his actions. The dignity of our 6th Divine Hall cannot be provoked." Back in the 100 Saints City, Jian Shen had no idea that the 6th Hall Master was already gathering his forces, wanting to make him pay for his actions. However, even if he knew, he would not care at all, as apart from the Darkstar Emperor, he feared nobody of the Darkstar race. Moreover, he only hoped to set off some internal strife among the Darkstar race sooner. If he could use this opportunity to kill a few more Hall Masters, that would obviously be for the best. In the Pantheon Divine Hall, the prodigies gathered there all thanked Jian Shen from the bottom of their hearts. Their faces were filled with gratitude. The force that Jian Shen had displayed made them place even greater trust in this 5th Hall Master. Jian Shen remained calm. He slowly glanced past everyone. When he discovered that Jin Hong was no longer among them, he immediately let out a sigh of relief. He knew that the 100 Saints City would probably experience an unprecedented disaster soon. It was even possible for the entire city to be massacred, where blood would flow as rivers. Making Jin Hong leave before this was obviously for the best. However, he spotted He Qianqian in the crowd very soon, and he immediately frowned by an undetectable amount. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28-21. The 5th Divine Hall's promise. However, Jian Shen soon understood what had happened. He had told Jin Hong that something big would be happening in the Darkstar race soon, and he had told Jin Hong to tell He Qianqian to leave the Darkstar race back then. However, what was his identity back then? He was merely a backgroundless independent cultivator, and it was the first time he had entered the Darkstar world too. He was clearly out of his mind if he thought he could make these prodigies from peak organizations leave with a simple word. Jin Hong had left because he obtained the droplet of Grand Exalt's essence blood from him. From his perspective, refining the Grand Exalt's essence blood was clearly even more important than what he could gain from the Darkstar race. As for He Qianqian, why would she leave this place because of an insignificant warning? Looks like I need to find a way to force her to leave. The Hao family too. An ancestor of theirs is the commander of the divine generals of the heavenly palace of Bisheng. He has a close connection to Ming Dong. I need to get them to leave. These thoughts flickered through Jian Chen's head, but he showed nothing on the surface. The mess in the Pantheon Divine Hall had been cleaned up very quickly, and a new table had been placed down. However, the new table was completely different from the one before. There was an order of seating this time, and Jian Shen and Bing Yuan were politely invited to take the seats of honor. The prodigies from the several dozen organizations all sat in seats of lower status. Esteemed Hall Master, may I ask if the god-tier heavenly resource offered up by our Heavenly Lightning Clan, the glazed fruit of scarlet blood, is to your satisfaction or not? Lei Yun from the Heavenly Lightning Clan asked eagerly soon after Jian Chen had sat down. His eyes were filled with hope and anticipation. They all understood the current protection from the Fifth Divine Hall was only temporary, just to earn them some time to deliver what the Fifth Divine Hall required. At the same time, this temporary protection could be lost at any time. Only when they received a promise from the mouth of the Fifth Hall Master could they truly find peace. As Lei Yun asked, many prodigies in the Pantheon Divine Hall became unsettled. The Fifth Divine Hall had actually paid a personal visit to the Pantheon Divine Hall, which was something unprecedented. They all worried whether the Fifth Divine Hall was giving them a final deadline. As a matter of fact, some of the prodigies had even accepted the inevitable situation, ready to retreat from the world of the fallen beast and give up on everything they had built up here. There were also a few organizations who had already prepared themselves to temporarily submit themselves to the Heavenly Lightning Clan. As for the condition of 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals for a century of protection the 7th and 6th divine halls offered, they had not even considered it. Most of their clans could produce 10 billion divine crystals. If it were in exchange for some precious materials from the Darkstar race, they would agree without hesitation. However, if it were for only a century of peace, it was simply far too horrible of a deal. Jian Chen sat in the seat of honor and said nothing, and none of the prodigies in the Pantheon Divine Hall spoke either. Their gazes all just gathered on Jian Chen, filled with unease and a reluctance to accept the situation. Jian Chen's silence also suddenly unsettled Lei Yun too. Despite being filled with confidence a moment earlier, he had suddenly become rather nervous now. Don't tell me the glazed fruit of scarlet blood from our clan isn't to the Fifth Hall Master's satisfaction? But the glazed fruit of scarlet blood is a god-tier heavenly resource through and through, Lei Yun thought. His forehead even became covered in a thin layer of sweat. The cold attitude of the Fifth Hall Master also left him uneasy. At this moment, a few sacrificial god kings arrived in the Pantheon Divine Hall while escorting an exquisite, white jade box, handing it personally to the prodigy from the Jade Pill sect. The prodigy from the Jade Pill sect immediately beamed. He accepted the jade box as he began to tremble slightly from excitement. He said to Jian Chen in the seat of honor, "Esteemed Hall Master, fortunately, we've managed to deliver what you asked for. The ancestor of our Jade Pill sect personally emerged to create this. We've successfully refined the god-tier pill you require, Hall Master. Please take a look." As he said that, the prodigy of the Jade Pill sect opened the white jade box. Immediately, a colorful haze emerged, and the fragrance of pills assaulted their noses. Inside the jade box quietly sat 7 pills of different colors. Everyone could tell with a single glance that these pills had not reached the god tier. They were still just shy of god tier. However, with the example of the glazed fruit of scarlet blood, the prodigies in the Pantheon Divine Hall dared not estimate these pills. All of them held their breaths and waited quietly, eager to see what kind of strange transformation these 7 pills would go through. After all, this was a pill the ancestor of the Jade Pill sect personally refined. All of them believed it was nowhere near as simple as it seemed on the surface. At this moment, the 7 pills lying in the jade box began to levitate by themselves. Each pills radiated with a different, blinding light as the smell of pills filled the entire Pantheon Divine Hall. Afterwards, under everyone's gazes, the 7 pills actually merged together in the middle of the air, and formations appeared on the jade box for holding the pills. It gathered the energy in the surroundings and transformed it into flames, carrying out the final refinement process of merging the pills. All of this was the handiwork of the Grand Prime Ancestor from the Jade Pill sect. When the jade box was opened, the pills underwent a final transformation according to the arrangements the ancestor of the Jade Pill sect had set up in the outside world. This step seemed easy, but actually achieving it was almost impossible. It required a miraculous degree of proficiency with the way of alchemy near the peak of perfection. Around 10 minutes later, the pill finally completed its final evolution. The 7 pills had truly merged together. Its size did not change, but the quality of the pill had truly reached the god tier. Hall Master, the ancestor of our Jade Pill sect, personally created this pill. It's a wondrous pill that even the saints' world does not possess. Now, I represent our Jade Pill sect to offer this pill to the Hall Master. I hope it can leave the Hall Master satisfied. The prodigy of the Jade Pill sect was in high spirits as he smiled confidently, personally offering the pill to Jian Chen. Jian Chen accepted the pill and immediately sensed how extraordinary it was. Its effects were several times stronger than the glazed fruit of scarlet blood at the very least. That was because just by touching the pill, his soul had been riled up. This allowed him to conclude the pill did not only heal injuries to the soul, but it could also strengthen the soul by a very great degree. There's a slight presence of pure souls. Jian Chen noticed something and slowly stowed the pill away. He smiled in satisfaction and said, "You're not wrong. I'm extremely satisfied with the pill from your Jade Pill sect. From now onwards, the Jade Pill sect will be under my protection. As long as I am still around, the Jade Pill sect will be around." Hearing that, the prodigy from the Jade Pill sect was overjoyed. He was so emotionally touched that he almost knelt down on his knees, while the other prodigies in the Pantheon Divine Hall were shaken up. They all became envious of him. They all understood exactly how precious the Fifth Hall Master's promise just then was. As long as the Fifth Divine Hall continued to stand, the Jade Pill sect would remain. This was basically equivalent to providing a permanent umbrella to the Jade Pill sect, shielding them from anything and everything. The Jade Pill sect had no need to fear any threats in the territory of the Darkstar race for an extremely lengthy period into the future. This was because the person standing behind the Jade Pill sect was a master of a divine hall, one that was extremely forceful and domineering. I never thought the Jade Pill sect would actually receive the eternal protection of the Fifth Divine Hall. Unless the Fifth Hall Master dies, the status of the Jade Pill sect will not waver in the Darkstar race. Sigh. Many prodigies shook their heads and sighed in the Pantheon Divine Hall. As they felt jealous of the Jade Pill sect, they also felt dejected for the future awaiting them. Esteemed Hall Master, what about our Heavenly Lightning Clan? Our Heavenly Lightning Clan has presented the Hall Master with a glazed fruit of scarlet blood. It's also at the God tier. Seeing the tremendous benefit that the Jade Pill sect had obtained, Lei Yun lost his patience and began to ask urgently. Jian Chen took out the glazed fruit of scarlet blood and tossed it to Lei Yun. Although the glazed fruit of scarlet blood has reached the God tier, it doesn't fulfill my conditions, so it doesn't qualify. Lei Yun was dumbfounded. He held the glazed fruit of scarlet blood with two hands as he descended into a daze. His face even became sheet white. However, I am very interested in the pieces of jade your Heavenly Lightning Clan used to nurture the glazed fruit of scarlet blood. If you can obtain some for me, I can also give your Heavenly Lightning Clan the same promise that as long as I am around, your Heavenly Lightning Clan will be around too. You will enjoy the same treatment as the Jade Pill sect, Jian Chen continued. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28-22, The Method of Obtaining Divine Crystals. Jian Chen's words allowed Lei Yun's dimming gaze to light up with a shred of hope again. However, when he heard Jian Chen's request, his face immediately warped. You may not know, but the pieces of jade for nurturing the glazed fruit of scarlet blood were extremely precious. Even our Heavenly Lightning Clan does not possess them. The 3 pieces of jade we used this time all came from an organization countless times more powerful than our clan, and we only obtained 3. Our Heavenly Lightning Clan is unable to produce a 4th piece, Lei Yun said bitterly. Jian Chen sat in his seat leisurely as he tapped the table casually, producing a rhythmic thud. He said calmly, if you can't produce it, then I can't guarantee your Heavenly Lightning Clan can remain among the Darkstar race safely. I'll give you half a month. Get the clan behind you to provide me with 30 of those jade pieces. 30, Lei Yun's eyes widened, quite heavily startled. He had no idea just how precious the pieces of jade with the laws of time were, but even the Heavenly Lightning clan did not possess them. Just that alone made their value and rarity obvious. In his opinion, he was already doing quite well to be able to produce 3 items of such value and rarity. 30 was beyond his imagination. That's right, 30. If you can provide them to me, not only will I protect your Heavenly Lightning clan, I'll reward you with an additional tale or 2 of ancestral sacred earth, said Jian Chen. When he heard about the ancestral sacred earth, Lei Yun finally received some comfort. Then let me contact the clan and inform them about your request. As he said that, Lei Yun backed out of the Pantheon Divine Hall. He could no longer care about what happened in the Pantheon Divine Hall. He had gone from heaven to hell, which left him in an extremely horrible mood. Many of the prodigies there were delighted to see the Heavenly Lightning clan being brought down to their knees. Last time when Lei Yun produced the glazed fruit of scarlet blood, he had been swollen with arrogance and spoken some big words, even revealing the Heavenly Lightning clan's wild ambition for everyone to yield to them. He had displeased many people since a long time ago. But today, the item that he relied on the most to gain a footing in the Darkstar race, the glazed fruit of scarlet blood, had been tossed back to him without hesitation by the 5th Hall Master. Then, he stated an even more difficult request for Lei Yun to fulfill, making him fall from heaven to hell in a single instant. The fate he faced left everyone glad and satisfied. They all took pleasure in his misery. Finally, Jian Chen's gaze landed on the prodigies remaining in the Pantheon Divine Hall and said, "Does anyone else have anything that fulfills my criterion?" The prodigies all fell quiet. No one said anything. They had already received the replies from their clans. The clans behind them were completely incapable of bringing God-tier heavenly resources into the Darkstar world. After a while of silence, a prodigy stood forward and clasped his fist at Jian Chen. "Hall Master, we cannot provide you with any God-tier heavenly resources, but we can provide the 5th Divine Hall with other cultivation resources. After all, the Darkstar race obtains large quantities of cultivation resources from us every year. We're willing to use these items to make up for what you require, so please give us a chance, Hall Master." "Oh, I see," Jian Chen hesitated slightly and said reluctantly, "Since I have the pill from the Jade Pill sect, my need for God-tier heavenly resources isn't as great anymore." "Fine, I'll give you a chance then." The prodigies there immediately beamed with joy with that, while the face of the prodigy from the Jade Pill sect immediately darkened. It was as ugly as it could get. Before they could say anything, Jian Chen continued, "Our race just happens to be in need of large quantities of divine crystals. How about this? As long as each organization provides me with some divine crystals, I'll agree to protect you all in the Darkstar race. Don't put on a long face. I know how the 6th and 7th Divine Halls had pressured you earlier. I'm not a person like them. I'd never do something so overboard." Only with that did the prodigies recover slightly. They really were afraid the 5th Divine Hall would hit them with exorbitant demands like the 7th Divine Hall, asking 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals for a century of peace. "Then may I ask how many divine crystals the Hall Master requires?" a prodigy asked carefully. 2 billion supreme-grade divine crystals should be enough to earn a century of protection from me, while 5 billion supreme-grade divine crystals will give you 5 centuries of protection. How about that? Isn't the price much better than what the 7th Divine Hall is offering? Jian Chen looked at everyone with a smile. 5 billion divine crystals for 5 centuries of peace. That's equivalent to 1 billion divine crystals for each century, which is a tenth of the 7th Divine Hall's price. Many of the prodigies secretly let out a sigh of relief. With the precedents the 7th Divine Hall had set, the prodigies found the price a little easier to accept. "Hall Master, you mustn't do this. You must not." As soon as the prodigy from the Jade Pill sect heard how the other organizations could purchase peace with mere supreme-grade divine crystals, he immediately began to panic. He said frantically, "With how precious and honorable it is to earn the protection of the Hall Master, only those who have offered up items of absolute rarity should enjoy something like that. How can we use something as inexpensive as supreme-grade divine crystals to exchange for the glory from the Hall Master? Please withdraw this command, Hall Master." Jian Chen's face sank slightly as he glanced over coldly. He said frigidly, "Is your Jade Pill sect trying to tell me what to do?" The prodigy of the Jade Pill sect was absolutely devastated. His complexion was horrendous. The ancestor of their Jade Pill sect had personally set out, spending tremendous effort to refine this unprecedented pill of wonder, and only then did they earn the protection of the fifth divine hall. Yet now, the others actually only needed to spend some divine crystals to receive the same treatment as the Jade Pill sect. The prodigy of the Jade Pill sect obviously refused to accept this. This was because their Jade Pill sect's lofty wish of lording over the 100 Saints city and maximizing their benefits would be falling through. However, did the prodigy of the Jade Pill sect have the courage to openly defy the slightly angered Fifth Hall Master? He immediately lowered his head to acknowledge his mistake. "You've misunderstood, Hall Master. How can our Jade Pill sect possess such audacity? Then keep your mouth shut." Jian Chen was blunt with the prodigy of the Jade Pill sect. Afterwards, he said to the other prodigies, "Remember, there are only 50 places if you want to use divine crystals to exchange for my protection. I will only protect 50 clans and organizations among you. As for those organizations who do receive protection, don't even think about incorporating in other clans and organizations so that they receive protection too. I'm not as stupid as you think I am. If you're really bold enough to do that, I think you all know the consequences of trying to fool me." Everyone looked at one another. Right now, there were 80 or 90 organizations gathered in the Pantheon Divine Hall, yet there were only 50 places available. Did that not mean almost half of them would have to go without protection? During the horrible situation earlier when the 7th Divine Hall was tempted to slaughter them all, possessing no protection would mean they would have to give up on their foundations here. However, there were even more people who looked at the prodigy from the Jade Pill sect with expressions of delight, taking pleasure in his misfortune. "Hall Master, our Heavenly Lightning clan is willing to offer up divine crystals." At this moment, Lei Yun had returned after receiving the news, rushing in from outside in a hurry. "The Heavenly Lightning clan is only permitted to offer up 30 pieces of jade with the laws of time. Otherwise, don't even think about remaining in the Darkstar race." Jian Shen managed to pour cold water over Lei Yun's heart that had lit up with hope in a single statement. "I'll give you 3 days to gather the divine crystals. I will pay you another visit in 3 days' time. By then, I will select 50 organizations among you." With that, Jian Shen turned around and left. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28-23, Forced to Compromise, 3 days? Only 3 days? That's nowhere near enough time. The hearts of the prodigies in the Pantheon Divine Hall all tightened as soon as they heard the 5th Hall Master's deadline. This was several billion supreme-grade divine crystals, not a few 100,000 or a few million. Only the clans behind them could mobilize such a tremendous sum of divine crystals, but this was the Darkstar world, not the Saints' world. Once they left here, they would only be in the ruins of the Spirits' world. There was still a tremendous distance between the ruins of the Spirits' world and the Saints' world. 3 days was truly far too short. Quick, quick, quick. Send people to take this news to the Great Elder waiting outside immediately. In the next moment, a prodigy began calling out, sending people out with the news impatiently. He truly seized every second. Everyone behaved like that, as the Darkstar world was a place of great benefits to all of their clans. Some of the benefits it could offer were even irreplaceable. It was possible to say that within all the places they knew so far, only the Darkstar world could offer these benefits. As a result, in order to protect their clan's interests, the prodigies all carried out their duties extremely carefully. Very soon, the Pantheon Divine Hall had been emptied out, only leaving behind the prodigy of the Jade Pill sect and a few of his attendants. The prodigy of the Jade Pill sect's face had become terrifyingly sunken as his gaze was gloomy. His refusal to accept this had become so intense that it was as vast and deep as the ocean. The prodigy from the Jade Pill sect was not the only one who experienced this. Lei Yun of the Heavenly Lightning clan also moped about alone in his divine hall. He felt indignant. Why? Why are the other clans allowed to use divine crystals, while our Heavenly Lightning clan has to use precious pieces of jade with the laws of time that even our clan does not possess? This isn't fair. This isn't fair. Lei Yun paced around in the divine hall. He was highly irritable. The fifth hall master has gone too far. If worst comes to worst, if push comes to shove, our Heavenly Lightning clan will just stop depending on the fifth divine hall. Isn't the Darkstar race suffering from a shortage of divine crystals right now? If you really piss us off, our Heavenly Lightning clan will just use divine crystals to befriend the first divine hall. I refuse to believe the fifth or seventh divine halls are bold enough to even touch a hair on us once we have the first divine hall's protection, Lei Yun said in some exasperation. Young master, please be careful with what you say. Please be careful. The fifth hall master is probably still close by. If the fifth hall master hears what you say, we can basically give up on remaining among the Darkstar race altogether. The expression of a nearby old man who seemed to be a caretaker changed and immediately warned Lei Yun. His face was filled with lingering fear. And, young master, have you ever considered we won't have this option even if we want to befriend the first divine hall? The 10 divine halls of the Darkstar race have always been existences we've struggled to befriend, as they completely look down on us. If it were not for the fact that we can provide them with some special resources from the Saints' world and the fact that we can provide a continuous supply of life-devouring beast corpses to them, they probably would have never allowed us to exist in the Darkstar world. And, we have no idea what kind of person the first hall master is. But that's different with the fifth hall master. At the very least, we can tell with a single glance that the fifth hall master has always been shielding our 100 Saint city to a certain degree if we look at the conflict between the fifth divine hall and the seventh and sixth divine halls. As a result, I personally believe the fifth hall master is instead a little more trustworthy. Lei Yun gradually calmed down after hearing the old man's explanation. The old man continued, there's something else that the young master may not have considered. Although the items the fifth hall master demands from our Heavenly Lightning clan is much more valuable than his demands to the other clans, we'll obtain the protection of the fifth hall master forever once we do present him with 30 pieces of jade with the laws of time. In other words, our Heavenly Lightning clan will be completely worry-free in the territory of the Darkstar race as long as we don't provoke the divine halls. There'll be no need for us to remain in constant fear and carry out everything cautiously like in the past. As for the organizations who exchange divine crystals for protection, they have a time limit. Right now, the Darkstar race is in desperate need of divine crystals, which is why divine crystals can be exchanged for temporary peace. However, once this shortage of divine crystals passes, the fifth divine hall can abandon them at any time. The old man's analysis opened Lei Yun's mind. All of his dissatisfaction vanished as he laughed aloud. That's right. The Darkstar race has required divine crystals in the past, but never have they required such a large quantity like recently. Once this period passes, the Darkstar race's demand will obviously go back to normal. By then, even if they produce 10 billion supreme-grade divine crystals for the Darkstar race to exchange for, the Darkstar race might not necessarily want it. After all, the rate at which the Darkstar race depletes divine crystals is like a drop in the ocean when compared to our Saints' world. Even if they have tens of billions of divine crystals, they won't be able to use all of it, and as time goes on, the energy in the divine crystals will only leak away for nothing. By then, I'd like to see how they handle the seventh divine hall's hatred and fury without the fifth divine hall's protection. However, our Heavenly Lightning clan will be different. Although it seems like we're getting the short end of the stick right now, it'll remove a problem for us forever in the long run. Lei Yun changed the topic and said sternly to the old man, Elder Shu, please make a trip personally and pass the fifth hall master's words on to the clan. It'll be completely up to the clan next on whether we can offer up another 30 pieces of jade. For a moment, the entrance and exit to the tunnel between the two worlds was crowded with people. People bustled as they went in and out, transferring messages around. What? The Darkstar race actually dares to demand a protection fee from us? How dare they? How dare they? They're a measly race without even a single chaotic prime, so how dare they try to extort our peak clans? Very soon, the news from the 100 Saints City reached the Darkstar City in the ruins of the Spirits World. Great elders of many peak organizations personally watched over the place, all chaotic primes. When these revered great elders heard the news from the Darkstar world, they all flew into a fury. 2 billion supreme grade divine crystals for a century of protection, 5 billion supreme grade divine crystals for 5 centuries of protection. This was basically extortion, and the targets they were trying to extort were these peak organizations who stood at the apex of the Saints' world. Their clans were so prosperous and powerful, yet they were now met with forceful demands for protection fees from a measly race that did not even have a chaotic prime. The whole matter was so absurd that they had never seen anything like it during all the years they had lived. Some people exploded with rage, radiating with anger, while others became amused by the extortions of this puny race. What do we do? What are we supposed to do about an extortion like this from the Darkstar race? Are we, a mighty peak clan who stands at the apex of a world, supposed to compromise with the Darkstar race? Sigh, what else can we do? There's a limit on the entrance to the world of the Forsaken Beast, which prevents the likes of us from entering, so there's nothing we can do about the Darkstar race. The Darkstar race also provides benefits that we cannot part with, so what else can we do apart from compromise? 5 billion supreme grade divine crystals for 5 centuries of peace. That is 1 billion divine crystals for a century of peace on average. We'll give it to them. We'll give it to them. What else are we supposed to do? Yeah. 1 billion divine crystals for a century is actually just a drop in the ocean compared to what we obtain from the Darkstar world. After all, divine crystals are a renewable resource in our Saints' world. There is an endless supply, while some of the rare materials from the Darkstar world only appear in the Darkstar world. We can't afford to miss out on them. But time is simply too tight. They've actually only given us 3 days. 5 billion supreme grade divine crystals is not a small sum. I'll have to return to the clan to arrange for this, but the round trip alone will take more than 3 days. Forget it. We won't make it in time if we return to our clans. Let's just borrow some from other organizations. There seems to only be 50 places. Damn, we need to gather 5 billion supreme grade divine crystals as quickly as possible. As a result, for the next period, the great elders of many major organizations personally set out, either borrowing or exchanging for divine crystals from the various organizations on the Darkstar continent. They began to gather divine crystals en masse. This directly resulted in virtually all the divine crystals in possession of the various organizations on the entire Darkstar continent ending up in their pockets. It directly led to an extreme shortage of divine crystals on the Darkstar continent, such that many cultivators did not even have enough to use for themselves. However, basically all the organizations behind the 100 Saints City were trying to gather 5 billion divine crystals, so after collecting all the divine crystals on the Darkstar continent, it still was not enough. As a result, the great elders either set out in person or sent out infinite prime elders to the 4 other continents in the ruins of the Spirits world, leading to a great scramble for divine crystals. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28-24. The 5 Hall Masters assembled. Obviously, Jian Shen had no idea that the condition for protection he proposed would actually cause so many chaotic primes in the ruins of the Spirits world to personally run about for divine crystals, as he was in the Darkstar world. He was on his way back to the 5th Divine Hall right now. Hall Master, I'm very curious. Are the pieces of jade with the laws of time really so important, such that the Hall Master is willing to give up on the glazed fruit of scarlet blood for them? Beside Jian Shen, Bing Yuan was unable to hold back his doubts and asked. At the same time, he became slightly worried and continued, and see Wuqing too. He's a vice Hall Master of a Divine Hall. You've humiliated him in the 100 Saints City, Hall Master, so the 6th Divine Hall probably won't let the matter slide. The 6th Divine Hall is quite a bit stronger than our 5th Divine Hall. Even the 7th Divine Hall pales slightly in comparison to the 6th Divine Hall. It's said that the 6th Hall Master Irvin has already reached the peak of the 6th heavenly layer. He's been spending the past few years in secluded cultivation, working towards his breakthrough to the 7th heavenly layer apparently. As for his strength, Irvin is definitely even stronger than 7th Hall Master Getti. As soon as he thought of the 6th Divine Hall's strength, Biyao became filled with worry. Within our faction, only the 2nd Hall Master Arna can hold his ground against Irvin. And, even if we ignore the 6th Hall Master Irvin, Wuqing is not the only one at the 4th heavenly layer. His elder brother, Wuqing, is also a 4th heavenly layer expert. Our 5th Divine Hall stands absolutely no chance against them with the strength they possess. Jianshan flew through the air with his hands behind his back as he said calmly, "You don't have to worry. I obtained a power that might have been left behind by the planetary beast in the Two-World Mountains. It's not enough for me to break through to the 7th heavenly layer, but I don't think I'll be afraid of Irwin as long as he's still at the 6th heavenly layer. As for the pieces of jade with the laws of time, I naturally have a use for them." On the 5th Divine Hall that hovered above the capital city of the Darkstar race, the teleportation formation built into the square outside the Divine Hall emitted a flash. As the power of teleportation gathered, Jianshan and Biyao appeared there. "Greetings, Hall Master." "Greetings, Vice Hall Master." The God King who guarded the teleportation formation immediately showed respect the moment he saw the figures appear in the teleportation formation, bowing courteously. Without acknowledging the God King, Jianshan stepped out of the teleportation formation. However, the moment he emerged, his expression suddenly changed. He casually glanced past the Divine Hall around him, and the corner of his lips curled into a faint sneer. At this moment, a tremendous aura suddenly erupted like a volcano from the direction of the 6th Divine Hall, flooding towards the 5th Divine Hall and crushing down like it came from a lord who stood above the masses. Immediately, the calm sky suddenly became filled with fierce gales. The thick clouds gathered in the sky were obliterated under the tremendous presence. Even the 5th Divine Hall that hovered in the air trembled gently, beginning to shake somewhat. "Kuan Tian, you've finally returned. You sure have made me wait." A furious bellow rang out from the 6th Divine Hall. Hall Master Irvin suddenly flew out of the Divine Hall, moving extremely quickly. He radiated with a monstrous presence along the way, arriving on the huge square of the 5th Divine Hall in the blink of an eye and gazing at Jianshan coldly. The 3 Vice Hall Masters of the 6th Divine Hall followed close behind, also arriving on the square of the 5th Divine Hall. They stood side by side behind Irvin. Wuqing's wounds had not healed by much. He had only healed a few important parts slightly so that he could remain standing. Perhaps for the sake of evidence, the wounds on his face remained the same. Both his cheeks had been smashed to pieces and fractures even appeared on his skull. It was a chilling sight to behold. As a Vice Hall Master, Wuqing was a respected figure. Forcing him to remain like this in the eye of the public only increased his internal torment, making him feel mortified. But for the sake of revenge, for the sake of making the 5th Hall Master pay for his actions, and for the sake of earning more sympathy, he knew he had to do this. "5th Hall Master, you've gone too far. Even if my younger brother is an imbecile, you shouldn't have humiliated him like this." The face of Wuqing's elder brother, Wuqing, darkened as he spoke coldly. There was no respect in his voice at all. He was only out to denounce the 5th Divine Hall. With the 6th Divine Hall's arrival, tremendous presences emerged from the 3rd, 4th, 7th, and 9th Divine Halls too. The Hall Masters of the 4 other Divine Halls basically appeared at the same time, striding through the air and arriving above the 5th Divine Hall in a single step, assembling with the 6th Divine Hall. "Kuan Tian, you really have gone a little too far with your actions this trip." The 7th Hall Master was the first to speak as cold light flickered through his eyes. "Just not the face, you know. Wuqing is still a Vice Hall Master after all. If he's disrespected you, a slight punishment is not exactly unacceptable, but humiliation like this." "Kuan Tian, you have gone a little too far," said the 9th Hall Master, a 5th heavenly layer infinite prime. The fourth Hall Master said, Kun Tian, even if you've obtained memories of the planetary beast that can exploit the God King grass from the two world mountains, even if it's very likely for you to make a huge contribution to our race, that's still not a reason for you to do whatever you want, regardless of the consequences. What are you all doing? The 5 Hall Masters have actually all assembled in the 5th Divine Hall. Do you really think our 4 Divine Halls are now targets of harassment just because we've lost Sunran? At this moment, a woman called out. 10th Hall Master Feng Shui arrived before Jian Chen frigidly, standing with Jian Chen to confront the 5 Hall Masters. Immediately, a total of 7 Hall Masters had assembled. Apart from when they saw the Emperor, rarely did this ever occur in the Darkstar world. With how far the situation had developed, it had basically become a confrontation between the two factions among the 10 Divine Halls. 2nd Hall Master Arna, who stood on the same side as the 5th Divine Hall, obviously could not sit out either, also flying over from his Divine Hall. Only the 8th Divine Hall had not shown up. Having lost their Hall Master, it was difficult for 2 Vice Hall Masters who were not particularly powerful to fill Sunran's shoes. On the square of the 5th Divine Hall, the two factions formed 2 distinct sides as they confronted each other. However, one side had 5 Divine Halls, while the other only had 3. There was a huge difference no matter how it seemed. Kun Tian has absolutely no idea how to behave at all. Why did he offend the 6th Divine Hall to such a degree over a measly 100 Saint city? I hope he can recover his memory soon. 2nd Hall Master Arna also felt extremely hopeless after learning about the whole story. Only Feng Shui, regardless of the reason, regardless of whether he was right or wrong, would stand by the side of Kun Tian resolutely. She refuted firmly, Wuqing only has himself to blame for what he's gone through. It's not like you don't know the 100 Saint City would have been wiped off the face of the Darkstar world a long time ago if it were not for Kun Tian's protection. The 100 Saint City has been Kun Tian's territory in the first place. Wuqing entered Kun Tian's territory to extort divine crystals without his permission. He has shown no respect for authority. He deserved to be beaten. Kun Tian, you must give us a satisfying explanation for this, or we'll never let this matter drop. 6th Hall Master Irvin said with a sunken voice. So what if you'll never drop the matter? Are you looking for a great battle? Do you feel like we're supposed to be afraid of you just because we don't have Sunran? Feng Shui said furiously, without a hint of fear. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28-25. I'll give you an explanation. Looking at the infuriated Feng Shui, who no longer seemed to care about anything, the 2nd Hall Master Arna, who belonged to the same faction as the 5th Divine Hall, could not help but sigh inside. If the 8th Hall Master Sunran were still present, their side would still have no chance at victory if they confronted the other faction, but at least they could contend with them to a certain degree. But now, the 8th Hall Master was dead. Having lost a powerful ally, what else did they have to hold their ground against the 5 Divine Halls? She clearly knew about her own disadvantaged position, yet not only did she refuse to hold back, but she had even chosen to behave aggressively, which gave the 2nd Hall Master Arna a great headache. Hall Master Feng, please calm down a little. Our predicament is no longer the same as in the past, Arna said to Feng Shui secretly, hoping to appease her before combining everyone's strength to settle this matter in the most appropriate way possible. Hall Master Feng, you should just leave this to me, Jian Chen said. He was calm, completely unfazed by this. He was not worried about this at all. He took a step forward slowly as his lips curled into a mysterious smile. He stared straight at the 6th Hall Master Irvin. Since you want me to give you an explanation, I'll give you an explanation. Hearing Jian Chen's tone and noticing the rather sinister and eerie smile on Jian Chen's face, Irvin's heart actually skipped a beat for some reason. He developed an ill feeling. In the next moment, a god artifact sword appeared in Jian Chen's hand. It began to emit surging energy pulses the moment it appeared. Madness and viciousness filled his eyes as he stabbed the sword towards Irvin without the slightest hesitation. Jian Chen did not hold back at all with the attack. Even though he was unable to unleash his maximum strength in the strike due to his disguise, it was still all the power he could unleash given the current circumstances. His sword pierced through space, producing a black crack there, reaching Irvin in a single breath. Kuan Tian, what are you doing? The sudden attack immediately made Irvin's expression change drastically. His eyes widened, filled with undisguised shock and disbelief. The strength Kuan Tian unleashed shocked him. It was far more powerful than what the rumors dictated, even more powerful than when he clashed with Getti in the past. The strike was enough for him to feel greatly threatened. He was in disbelief over how bold Kuan Tian was. After all, where were they right now? They were in the capital city of the Darkstar race, and more importantly, the location where the 10 divine halls stood. He had actually launched an attack so decisively here, even unleashing his full strength right from the beginning. He was utterly fearless. A madman. He really is a madman. Noticing the viciousness and madness in Jian Chen's eyes, Irvin could not help but curse inside. He had heard from Getti a long time ago that without his memories, Kuan Tian had become a completely unreasonable madman who had no concept of consequences, but he had never taken it to heart. Only today did he truly learn that Kuan Tian could be this crazy after losing his memories. It all happened in a split second. Even though Kuan Tian's sudden attack shocked Irvin, he was still a primordial realm expert after all, so his reactions were equally fast. A sword appeared in his hand instantly, and he parried with it as powerful energy surged. Irvin was not bold enough to directly launch an attack as fearlessly as Jian Chen above the capital city, just in case the consequences developed out of hand. Kuan Tian, stop, Kuan Tian, this is the capital city, and we're standing among the 10 divine halls at that. How can you act so recklessly, Kuan Tian, have you lost your mind? Why don't you check where we are right now? At the same time, the gathered hall masters changed drastically in expression too as they bellowed out in surprise and anger. However, battle was already unavoidable. In the critical moment, they only managed to pour their strength together and create a barrier in time, isolating the region of space. The 10th Hall Master Feng Xiao and the 2nd Hall Master Arna clearly understood the severity of the matter as well. It was absolutely forbidden for primordial realm experts to rampage through the capital city, as the ripples of energy would be far too powerful and affect the many clansmen in the city below. As a result, with no other choice, the two of them were forced to construct an energy barrier with the 4 other hall masters. Behind them, the vice hall masters present did not stand around either. They all lended their strength, channeling out with energy endlessly to strengthen the barrier. Boom! Basically in the moment the energy barrier had been created, Jian Chen's sword stabbed mercilessly into Irvin's sword with tremendous force. The force transmitted through the sword was shocking and terrifying. In the moment they made contact, Irvin's body shuddered heavily. He had responded frantically, so he obviously struggled to block the attack. He was sent flying, smashing heavily against the energy barrier behind him and causing the barrier to shake violently. Kuan Tian, stop. Even if you plan on fighting, you can't do it here. Feng Shui's voice rang out in a slightly anxious and worried manner. However, Jian Chen did not seem to hear her. He also seemed to have entered a state of frenzy completely, losing all sense of rationality. He could no longer hear anyone. His eyes were completely red and bloodshot. His craziness did not weaken, intensifying instead. He let out a great laugh. Ha ha ha, didn't you want an explanation? I'll give you an explanation. I'll give you an explanation right now. As he spoke, his presence swelled once again. Dressed in god artifact armor and wielding a god artifact sword, both the armor and the sword radiated with resplendent light. The energy was earth-shaking as he struck out again, swinging the sword as hard as he could towards Irvin. Irvin's face darkened and paled. He had never thought the situation would actually develop like this. In particular, when he saw the blood-red light that was clearly without any rationality in Kuan Tian's eyes, he actually felt a tinge of regret. In the next moment, with a thunderous rumble, Jian Chen and Irvin clashed again. However, Irvin clearly could not launch reckless attacks like Jian Chen, so all he could do was defend passively. As a result, he could only grunt from Jian Chen's attack before being sent flying again. The energy barrier the Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters constructed shook violently. Jian Chen continued to laugh loudly. He seemed like he had already reached the peak of his power as a layer of faint, red light began to radiate from his body. When the blood-red light appeared, his presence that had already been extremely powerful rose once again, and the pulses of energy he gave off became even more terrifying. Oh no, he's actually igniting his essence blood. He's actually igniting his essence blood, igniting his essence blood? Oh no, Kun Tian has completely lost his mind. How can he ignite his essence blood? Stop him quick. The Hall Masters from both factions changed in expression when they saw this. They were all shocked. He was igniting his essence blood. Was he preparing himself for a battle to the death? The Hall Masters of the two factions had opposed each other for all these years. As a matter of fact, full-blown battles had erupted between them multiple times in the past, but never had it been like this, where they were out to kill. Even heavy injuries rarely occurred during these battles. Most of the time, they would stop when they knew it was enough. As a result, as Kun Tian's action of igniting his essence blood shocked them, they also felt rather helpless. Some of the Vice Hall Masters had even become rather frantic as if the sky was falling down. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28-26. The Emperor's Suppression. Looking at how Kun Tian had become crazy to the point where he was beyond reason, even the 6th Hall Master became rather dazed. Kun Tian's current behavior even made Irvin wonder whether he had any unforgivable grievances with Kun Tian in the past. Otherwise, why would Kun Tian behave like this? Kun Tian, keep in mind that you humiliated a Vice Hall Master of my 6th Divine Hall first. I just want an explanation for that. Aren't you taking it too far? For a moment, Irvin became rather nervous. The Primordial Realm experts of the Darkstar world were not the Primordial Realm experts of the Saints world after all. Within the Darkstar race, battles to the death among the Primordial Realm never occurred. Even when they were God Kings, battles to the death were already extremely rare. The reason why every single one of them possessed strength that far exceeded cultivators at the same cultivation in the Saints world was because they remained at cultivation levels for an astronomical amount of time. The amount of strength they would accumulate over time made them virtually unrivaled in the Saints world. On the other hand, countless battles to the death were unavoidable as cultivators of the Saints world advanced through each cultivation level. As a result, the Darkstar race obviously paled in comparison to the cultivators of the Saints world in terms of ferocity. Truly, the crude and rash were afraid of the short-tempered, while the short-tempered were afraid of the desperate. Looking at how Kun Tian was desperate enough to throw his life on the line, Irvin immediately became frightened out of his wits. He no longer possessed the same overbearing arrogance as before. Some of the Hall Masters who maintained the energy barrier had already withdrawn their energy. They were prepared to stop Kun Tian together. They could already tell that Kun Tian was not much weaker than Irvin. He might have even been able to match him evenly. He was already so powerful, so combined with his increased battle prowess from igniting his essence blood, Irvin was not his opponent. That was unless Irvin was as crazy as Kun Tian and began igniting his essence blood regardless of the consequences too. But clearly, they did not want the situation to develop to that point. Maintain the energy barrier. Leave the rest to me. At this moment, a nonchalant voice rang out from above. It came from the Darkstar Emperor in the Imperial Palace. As soon as they heard the Emperor's voice, the utterly nervous Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters below immediately let out sighs of relief as if their savior had come. The Emperor was actually intervening personally. They would be able to overcome everything no matter what happened. With the voice, a colossal imperial seal descended from above, shining with dazzling light like a miniature sun had appeared in the sky. It fell down towards Jian Chen with tremendous pressure and the power to suppress all. A medium-quality god artifact, and a relatively complete medium-quality god artifact at that. Jian Chen shivered inside. In the Saints' world, medium-quality god artifacts were usually wielded by chaotic primes. Of course, there were an extremely small number of peak infinite primes who possessed them. There were even some peak experts, some early grand primes, who came from overly lackluster backgrounds that continued to use medium-quality god artifacts, as they had no high-quality god artifacts available to them. The power of medium-quality god artifacts could not be compared to low-quality god artifacts. However, only chaotic primes could completely unleash their powers. Now, a relatively complete medium-quality god artifact had actually appeared in the Darkstar Emperor's hands, which immediately amplified the pressure Jian Chen was feeling inside. Even though the Darkstar Emperor still could not unleash all the power of the medium-quality god artifact, a portion of it was already earth-shaking. Jian Chen did not block or dodge as he faced the descending Imperial Seal. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on Irvin as if he had failed to notice the falling Imperial Seal at all. Bang! With a heavy thud, the Imperial Seal directly fell down on top of Jian Chen with an undefiable and great force. As the power of suppression radiated outwards constantly, it immediately limited all of Jian Chen's actions. Of course, despite the suppression of the Imperial Seal, Jian Chen still planned on going all the way, from start to finish, with his act of madness. The redness in his eyes lingered as he remained irrational, staring fixedly and madly at Irvin as he produced furious roars. Clearly, the Darkstar Emperor had no intentions of injuring anyone, so even though the Imperial Seal radiated with surging pressure, it only limited Jian Chen's movements and was not lethal at all. Kuan Tian, why don't you come to your senses? The Darkstar Emperor's voice rang out in the sky. His voice was very flat, but it was filled with an undefiable sense of authority. And the voice seemed to possess some kind of magic, able to stun the soul to a certain degree. The souls of the Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters who heard it all quivered as if they were almost drawn away. With the Darkstar Emperor's voice, the Hall Masters present all noticed the redness in Kuan Tian's eyes had actually begun to slowly recede. He gradually calmed down too. Finally, after a few seconds, the Hall Masters all let out a sigh of relief, as they could see a normal light in Kuan Tian's eyes now. They knew that Kuan Tian had completely recovered from his episode of madness. The Darkstar Emperor's Imperial Seal flew away, and the suppressing force vanished. Feng Shui arrived before Jian Chen in a flash. Her face was filled with undisguised concern and worry. Kuan Tian, you've finally returned your senses. Did you know what you just did? You almost frightened me to death. Kuan Tian, what exactly happened with you earlier? Why did you suddenly behave like that? The second Hall Master Arna arrived before Jian Chen too as he asked with a frown. Jian Chen took in a few heavy breaths as he still seemed to be shaken up. It's the planetary beast. The memories of the planetary beast I obtained in the depths of the Two-World Mountains are contaminated with hints of brutality. I was actually influenced by it unknowingly earlier. The only thought in my head was slaughter and destruction, death and annihilation. Feng Shui and Arna's expression changed with that. They became extremely stern, and the 5 other Hall Masters all began looking at one another too. As a matter of fact, hints of fear had appeared in the depths of a few people's eyes. That was because what Jian Chen said at the end, the only thought in my head was slaughter and destruction, death and annihilation, made everyone's eyes narrow. If Kuan Tian's mental state had really become like this, such that he would lose his rationality from the slightest anger and begin a massacre, then who would still be bold enough to provoke him in the future? Who would still provoke a madman who was willing to throw their lives at you over some petty matters? In that moment, the 6th Hall Master Irvin was filled with utter regret. If he had known earlier that the slightest anger could make Kuan Tian lose complete control, he would have never stood forward personally. The end result was not only had he failed to redeem his pride, but he had even been reduced to a sorry state instead. He had truly gone for wool, only to come home shorn. A figure descended from above. The Darkstar Emperor had personally appeared. Based on his appearance alone, he seemed like a valiant young man around 20 years of age, but his eyes were filled with a somberness that came with age. "Greetings, Your Majesty." The Darkstar Emperor possessed absolute authority in the Darkstar race. His appearance immediately caused all the Hall Masters and Vice Hall Masters to bow politely. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. The Darkstar Emperor shifted his gaze to Jian Shen and said, "Kun Tian, apart from me, no one within the Darkstar race knows about the Virtuous Sage of Heaven's existence. Please bear in mind to not tell anyone about how you met the Virtuous Sage of Heaven today." Jian Shen came to an understanding and agreed in a hurry. Afterwards, he could not help but glance at the Virtuous Sage of Heaven. He immediately began to pay special attention to him. From instincts alone, he could sense that the Virtuous Sage of Heaven before him was anything but simple. Of course, what truly shocked him was how the existence of the Virtuous Sage of Heaven could be hidden from the Darkstar race for all these years. He had no idea how long the Virtuous Sage of Heaven had existed among the Darkstar race. If it had not been too long, then that would be fine, but if he had already existed since almost time immemorial, it would truly be rather terrifying. Jian Shen could not help but secretly raise his guard over this. "Kun Tian, you can begin. Ingest the pill you obtained from the 100 Saint City first. If the pill still isn't enough for you to recover, then I'll lend you a helping hand with the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures," said the Virtuous Sage of Heaven. His voice was amiable, which made him seem highly approachable and friendly. Jian Shen hesitated slightly before asking in a slightly doubtful tone, "But Your Majesty, I can see the Virtuous Sage of Heaven should be roughly equivalent to a God King. Can a God King really provide assistance to a primordial realm expert's recovery? Or perhaps the Virtuous Sage of Heaven is highly accomplished in the aspect of souls, possessing alarming attainments that we can only look up to?" Faced with Kun Tian's questions, the Darkstar Emperor was not confused at all, as even he was unable to accurately determine the Virtuous Sage of Heaven's cultivation. However, the Virtuous Sage of Heaven did indeed seem like a God King most of the time. Anyone would raise an issue with a God King telling a primordial realm expert what to do about their injuries. "Kun Tian, you mustn't underestimate the Virtuous Sage of Heaven, much less show even the slightest disrespect towards the Virtuous Sage of Heaven. That's because not only is the Virtuous Sage of Heaven a great sage who has made vast contributions to our race, but he's also the person with the highest level of status and seniority in our race. Technically speaking, the Virtuous Sage of Heaven is a senior of everyone in our race. Moreover, the Virtuous Sage of Heaven's strength is nowhere near as simple as what you see, so you must not treat the Virtuous Sage of Heaven as a God King. As for attainments of the soul, the Virtuous Sage of Heaven is indeed the greatest within our race. With his guidance, your chances of recovery will increase drastically," the Darkstar Emperor explained patiently. "Your Majesty, there's something I don't understand. Since the Virtuous Sage of Heaven outranks everyone in our race right now in terms of seniority, then why does no one know about the Virtuous Sage of Heaven despite all the time that has passed?" Jian Shen asked. His vigilance towards the Virtuous Sage of Heaven had already risen to the limit. "Enough. Don't ask anything more. I still can't tell you about the details regarding the Virtuous Sage of Heaven, as that's the greatest secret of our race. I will naturally tell you when you need to know." The Darkstar Emperor was reluctant to say anything more. Clearly, the identity of the Virtuous Sage of Heaven was overly sensitive such that even people like the 10 Hall Masters did not know about him. Jian Shen knew he could not ask any more questions, so he simply shut up and sat down, swallowing the pill he had obtained from the Jade Pill sect. What a pity. The quality of the pill is impressive. Even in the Saints' world, it's something you can't have enough of. I didn't want to waste it like this, but it looks like I don't have a choice anymore. Jian Shen was filled with helplessness as he swallowed the pill. After all, this was a pill that healed the soul, and its effects definitely surpassed the glazed fruit of scarlet blood. Even Jian Shen felt rather pained to simply waste a precious pill like that. In the saints' world, regular god-tier pills were relatively easy to obtain, but god-tier pills that could heal the soul, particularly pills that bore the presence of pure souls, were truly items that could only be obtained through luck. Virtuous Sage of Heaven, I must trouble you, the Darkstar Emperor said secretly to the Virtuous Sage of Heaven as he watched Kun Tian enter a state of recovery. You are too kind, Your Majesty. I will do everything I can. The Virtuous Sage of Heaven also replied secretly without being overly polite or overly rude. His eyes hidden behind the mist also landed on Jian Shen's face, and his lips curled into a mysterious smile. However, even the Darkstar Emperor failed to notice his expression change, as if no one in the entire Darkstar world would know about it if he tried to hide something. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28-29, Lurking Danger on Another Side. Jian Shen ingested the god-tier pill from the Jade Pill sect before entering an oblivious state of recovery. But in reality, he did not recover at all, as he had no wounds. He had ingested the pill and entered a meditative state to put on an act. In reality, he was extremely vigilant inside, having raised his wariness to the limit already. He was not wary of the Darkstar Emperor, nor was he particularly worried the Darkstar Emperor would detect anything wrong. The Darkstar Emperor's strength was exceptional. With the strength to challenge those at higher cultivations, he possessed extraordinary battle prowess that was on par with chaotic primes of the first heavenly layer, or maybe even the second heavenly layer, but even if Jian Shen were up against an expert like him, he had complete confidence that he could retreat safely. What truly made him fearful was the Virtuous Sage of Heaven who had suddenly appeared. Especially after learning about the tip of the iceberg regarding the Virtuous Sage of Heaven's origins, his level of dread towards him had become unprecedented. That was because he could not see through the Virtuous Sage of Heaven at all. He seemed to be wrapped in a thick layer of mist, concealing himself away. Jian Shen knew that the more someone was like that, the more terrifying they would be. It went without saying that the effects of the god-tier pill the Jade Pill sect provided was extraordinary. Even without any injuries or underlying conditions to the soul, the god-tier pill could still function as a great supplement to the ingester. As the effects of the god-tier pill kicked in, Jian Shen immediately felt a refreshing sensation from his soul as if his entire soul was undergoing a mellow purification. Not only had it become even more consolidated, but the presence of pure souls in the god-tier pill directly strengthened his soul, leading to a wondrous effect where his soul became even sturdier. As a result, Jian Shen could clearly feel his soul strengthen slightly after ingesting the god-tier pill. Even though this increase was not very substantial due to the limited quantity and quality of the pure souls, he could truly feel an increase. After all, with his current cultivation and the strength of his soul, strengthening it again was anything but easy. Yet, this pill managed to achieve that, which was more than enough to demonstrate its value. They said that the ancestor of the Jade Pill sect personally refined this pill. It truly is a god-tier pill produced in the hands of a supreme expert. Even under such strict conditions to deliver it into the Darkstar world, he still managed to refine a pill with such startling effects. If it were the Saints' world instead, the effects of the pill will definitely be even more startling. Jian Shen was secretly filled with admiration. Although he had basically scammed the Jade Pill sect with this, their ancestor truly approached perfection with his mastery over the way of alchemy. Before long, the effects of the pill gradually subsided, but the Virtuous Sage of Heaven that Jian Shen had been secretly guarding against the entire time did not do anything. Jian Shen had not even sensed a sliver of the senses of the soul. He could not help but grow suspicious. Was the Virtuous Sage of Heaven really someone that the Darkstar Emperor had sent to assist him? If he were supposed to provide assistance, why had he done nothing? Kun Tian, you can take your leave for now, the Virtuous Sage of Heaven said all of a sudden. That immediately made Jian Chen's heart shudder as he remained in the same meditative pose, acting as if he were still in a state of recovery. In that moment, he felt a sliver of shock. That was because he had done nothing after ingesting the god-tier pill. He had remained in the same posture like a statue, yet the virtuous sage of heaven was able to detect the effects of the god-tier pill had already subsided without even releasing the senses of his soul. How could he not be shocked? Virtuous sage of heaven, you mean? A sliver of shock appeared in the Darkstar Emperor's eyes. His gaze rested on Kun Tian hesitantly. He was unable to tell whether Kun Tian had roused either. After a moment of silence, he asked, Kun Tian, have you recovered your memories? Jian Chen opened his eyes and did not disguise his disappointment. He stood up and clasped his fist at the Darkstar Emperor. I've disappointed your majesty. I haven't recovered my memories. The uncertainty in the Darkstar Emperor's eyes grew heavier. Kun Tian had not recovered. He was even prepared to use the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures, which was something rare that could greatly benefit the soul, so why did the virtuous sage of heaven send Kun Tian away? The virtuous sage of heaven did not give him an answer. Instead, he continued to say to Jian Chen, Kun Tian, you have no business here anymore. You should go for now. The Darkstar Emperor was filled with doubt, but due to his absolute trust in the virtuous sage of heaven, he followed his instructions and sent Jian Chen away. Virtuous sage of heaven, could you relieve me of my confusion? The Darkstar Emperor asked the virtuous sage of heaven after Jian Chen had left. Your Majesty, I failed to sense any damage to Kun Tian's soul. If that's true, then it would mean his injuries are already beyond my capabilities. Please forgive me for being unable to do anything, the virtuous sage of heaven said calmly. The Darkstar Emperor furrowed his brows firmly. No damage? If there's no damage, then why hasn't Kun Tian's memories recovered yet? Perhaps it's because of the land of soul destruction. That's one of the forbidden zones created when the planetary beast died back then after all. As long as it touches on matters or items at the planetary beast's level, it isn't strange for it to be unexplainable, said the virtuous sage of heaven. The Darkstar Emperor nodded in agreement. He understood the land of soul destruction better than anyone, as he had once remained in there for a lengthy period of time. He had been through the various dangers there a long time ago. As a result, the Darkstar Emperor believed the fact that Kun Tian's soul had already recovered, yet his memories were still missing, did not make absolutely no sense. After all, matters regarding the land of soul destruction touched on a level that was simply too high. Virtuous sage of heaven, is there really nothing else we can do? If Kun Tian doesn't recover his memories, it'll definitely affect the great ceremony drastically. The Darkstar Emperor still refused to give up on even the slightest hope. After all, this would impact the great ceremony. With something that could decide the fate of the entire race at stake, he could not allow for any carelessness, much less any mistakes. The virtuous sage of heaven shook his head and said nothing else. The Darkstar Emperor could not help but sigh. Looks like all we can do is look for another way. Elsewhere, Jian Chen locked himself up in a secret room the moment he returned to the 5th Divine Hall. Within the dim room, Jian Chen shut his eyes and sat with his legs crossed. His expression was peaceful and tranquil, but in reality, his heart was like a stormy sea, kicking up great waves of shock. The various scenes he had gone through in the Darkstar Divine Hall earlier replayed through his head constantly. The mysterious virtuous sage of heaven made him feel an unprecedentedly great threat. The threat might not be tied to his life, but it did tie into his true identity. That was because he had clearly sensed that the virtuous sage of heaven had done absolutely nothing earlier. He had not even expanded a sliver of the senses of his soul, yet he was able to accurately determine that the effects of the god-tier pill had subsided in his body. To be able to achieve this meant the virtuous sage of heaven's strength had already reached an extremely terrifying level. Of course, if that were all, it was possible to interpret it as the virtuous sage of heaven possessing some other kind of special ability, allowing him to ignore the difference in cultivations and closely detect any changes regarding pills. The Darkstar Emperor had originally prepared the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures to recover Kun Tian's memories in case the god-tier pill failed. Yet towards the end, when the effects of the pill wore off, the virtuous sage of heaven showed no intentions for Jian Chen to continue with ingesting the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures. Instead, he directly told him to leave. It was as if he were certain that even if Jian Chen ingested the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures, it would have absolutely no effect at all. In other words, the virtuous sage of heaven wanted to conserve the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures. He did not wish to see something as precious as the spiritual fluid of 9 apertures being used on Jian Chen. However, regardless of the conclusions Jian Chen had reached from these, he felt greatly threatened. He was extremely worried over whether the virtuous sage of heaven had seen through his identity or not. Or perhaps the virtuous sage of heaven had already seen through him. Various thoughts flashed through Jian Chen's head, which made him uneasy. He was not attached to this identity, but without this identity, saving Sacred Feather would become much more difficult. And, he had even promised the heartless child to destroy the Darkstar race's great ceremony. Whether it was saving Sacred Feather or destroying the ceremony, his disguise as Kun Tian would make it all much easier. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 28:30. The deadline approaches. I never thought the Darkstar race would actually have someone like the virtuous sage of heaven. Looks like I need to be careful in the future. But most importantly, I don't know if the virtuous sage of heaven has seen through my identity. He shouldn't have, or he wouldn't have been so calm if he suddenly discovered the 5th Hall Master was no longer the same person as before. Jian Chen thought to himself. Back in the Darkstar Divine Hall, he had been paying attention to every single action from the virtuous sage of heaven the entire time. Now that he recalled it, the virtuous sage of heaven had remained extremely calm the entire time in the Darkstar Divine Hall. He showed no signs of any emotional reaction. The mask that Senior Mo Tianyun gave me is extraordinary. As long as I wear the mask, even Grand Primes can't see through my true identity. The mask only loses its function before peak figures who have reached the 9th heavenly layer of Grand Prime. The origins of the virtuous sage of heaven and what he's capable of might be a mystery, but it's impossible for him to be an expert like that. That's because this is the Darkstar world, a special place where chaotic primes cannot appear as of right now. Thinking up to this, Jian Chen's nervous heart finally settled down. He eased up by quite a lot. Of course, the thing that gave him the greatest confidence was still his strength. Right now within the Darkstar race, no one could threaten him apart from the Darkstar Emperor. However, after learning about the existence of the virtuous sage of heaven, Jian Chen also understood something. The Darkstar race might have been puny, but they still had a glorious past after all. Even though they had declined, they still could not be underestimated. Who knew whether there were any more special, unknown existences like the virtuous sage of heaven hiding in the Darkstar world? Who knew how many more of them existed? This made him develop a little more caution towards the Darkstar race, a race that was technically still very weak. Jian Chen had no idea that as he remained in the secret room of the 5th Divine Hall, the virtuous sage of heaven who existed as an illusionary figure stood in the imperial palace above the 10 divine halls silently like a ghost. His eyes that were hidden in the mist, such that no one could see them, were currently fixed in the direction of the 5th divine hall. His gaze seemed to be able to lock onto Jian Chen's current position with great accuracy. He actually stared straight at the location of the secret room with perfect precision. Jian Chen, oh Jian Chen. You've really run around in the Darkstar race lately, haven't you? The strange mask you brought prevents anyone in the Darkstar race from seeing through your true identity apart from me, and behaving as an amnesiac also provides a suitable cover for anything that can lead to misgivings, but you shouldn't treat the upper echelon of the Darkstar race as brainless idiots that you can simply fool around with. If it's just once or twice, then so be it. But if this becomes a habit, you will give yourself away someday. It doesn't matter if you give yourself away, but if you get in the way of my business, then you truly deserve to die. Though, you still can't die in the Darkstar world. I hope my appearance will make you raise your guard. Don't be so reckless again. Since you've chosen the identity of Kun Tian, then you should act out the role of Kun Tian to the end. The virtuous sage of heaven hovered in the air like a ghost. No one could discover his existence as he said with a voice that only he could hear. During the next few days, Jian Shen did not leave the fifth divine hall again. On the surface, the reason was to study high-grade God King grass as if he was currently investigating and experimenting with the method to make use of the energy in God King grass, but in reality, he was coming up with countermeasures for the various situations he could potentially encounter. The virtuous sage of heaven's existence forced Jian Shen to make early preparations for the worst-case scenario. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Today was the final deadline Jian Shen had given the 100 Saint City to gather divine crystals. 3 days have already passed. I wonder how the divine crystal gathering process has been going with the 100 Saint City. Jian Shen emerged from the secret room after 3 days. He handed the waste from the several hundred stalks of high-grade God King grass he had destroyed during the 3 days to a servant before leaving once again with Bing Yuan. The Darkstar Emperor learnt about what happened in the 100 Saint City pretty quickly. He's already been paying attention to the situation there. He might have already planted people there. Combined with the mysterious and strange virtuous sage of heaven, it looks like I need to be a little more careful in the 100 Saint City, Jian Shen thought. His visit to the Darkstar Divine Hall had made him extremely cautious. In the Pantheon Divine Hall, all the organizations stationed in the 100 Saint City had already gathered together. Everyone sat around the large discussion table silently, uneasy and nervous, which made the atmosphere of the Pantheon Divine Hall extremely heavy. A single sentence echoed through their heads, which was about the 50 places the fifth hall master had offered 3 days ago. The end result of these 50 places directly made them grow more nervous and uneasy each time they looked around the table. That was because while there were not 100 organizations in the 100 Saint City, there were still around 80 to 90 of them. That also meant over a third of the organizations would not be permitted to remain in the 100 Saint City any longer. That was far too high of a rejection rate, so high that everyone present felt threatened. Has the clan still not answered? Lei Yun of the Heavenly Lightning asked the servant beside him again and again. He could be described as the most nervous and anxious person present, as basically all the prodigies from the other organizations had gathered enough divine crystals, while his Heavenly Lightning clan had remained silent the entire time. The servant shook his head. He also felt extremely uneasy. Had the Heavenly Lightning clan given up on their business in the Darkstar race already? The fifth hall master arrives. At this moment, a resonant voice rang out outside the Pantheon Divine Hall. The prodigies seated around the table all leapt to their feet. They all bowed sternly and solemnly towards the fifth hall master at exactly the same time as he strode in. Jian Shen directly made his way over to the seat of honor and sat down, while Bing Yuan stood to one side silently. However, his eyes shone slightly, hiding a hint of eagerness in his gaze towards the prodigies. That was because their fifth divine hall would also run out of divine crystals too. Even though they had already purchased a large quantity of divine crystals, it was still not enough. Whether they could resolve the issue of divine crystals would all be up to today. Everyone, you must all know why I've come already. Since that's the case, I'll get right to the point. The deadline of 3 days is up. What is everyone planning to do? Jian Shen cut right to the chase as soon as he spoke, looking at everyone with brimming interest. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.